Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Call That Changed Everything. James Pierce sat in his home office, the evening light filtering through the blinds as he reviewed security protocols for his consulting firm. At 35, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen combat in Afghanistan and had built a successful private security business from the ground up. His broad shoulders and steel-gray eyes spoke of someone who'd learned early that the world could be cruel, but that strength and intelligence could level any playing field. The familiar chime of his laptop interrupted his work. A video call from his sister Sandra, something that had become increasingly rare since she'd married Rick Stevenson 3 years ago. James accepted the call, expecting to see his nephew Tommy's excited face as they celebrated the boy's 3rd birthday. Instead, what he saw made his blood run cold. Little Tommy sat in front of the camera, white bandages wrapped around both eyes. The child's small hands fumbled in the air, clearly disoriented. "Uncle James? Uncle James, are you there? I can't see anything." "I'm here, buddy," James said, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "What happened to your eyes?" Before Tommy could answer, Sandra's voice cut through sharply from off-camera. "We're on a cruise, James. Stop prying." Her tone was cold, dismissive, nothing like the warm sister he'd grown up with. James leaned forward, studying the background. The lighting was wrong for a cruise ship. The walls looked like a cheap motel room, not a luxury cabin. "Sandra, get on camera. I want to talk to you." "We're busy," came Rick's voice, equally cold. "Tommy had a little accident." "He's fine." "What kind of accident leaves a 3-year-old with both eyes bandaged?" James's military training kicked in, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that had commanded respect from soldiers under fire. Tommy began to cry softly. "Daddy got mad because I spilled juice. He said I needed to learn to be more careful." The call ended abruptly. James stared at the black screen, his hands clenching into fists. 20 years of friendship, followed by 5 years in the Army Rangers, followed by a decade building his security business, had taught him to read people and situations. This wasn't an accident. This was abuse, and Sandra and Rick were running. His wife, Catherine, entered the office, her auburn hair catching the light. She'd been his anchor since they'd met in college, the one person who could calm his warrior's heart. "Who was that? You look like you're about to go to war." "I might be," James said, already pulling up his laptop. "Call Detective Holland. Tell him we need to meet tonight." Christian Holland had been James's partner in the military police before they'd both transitioned to civilian careers. Now a detective with the state police, Christian owed James his life from an incident in Kandahar that neither man talked about. As Catherine made the call, James began typing rapidly, accessing databases that his security clearance still allowed him to use. Within minutes, he had Rick Stevenson's credit card records, travel history, and a disturbing pattern of emergency room visits for Tommy over the past year. The last charge on Rick's card was from a motel in Clearwater, Florida, 2 days ago. But James's experience told him they were already moving. His phone rang. Christian's gravelly voice came through. "Catherine says it's urgent. What do you need?" "I need you to put out a bolo on Rick Stevenson and Sandra Pierce Stevenson. They've hurt Tommy, and they're running." "On what grounds? Did you file a report?" James forwarded the emergency room records he'd pulled. "Look at the pattern. A 3-year-old doesn't have this many accidents." "And Christian, I just saw Tommy on video chat. Both eyes bandaged. They claimed they were on a cruise, but the background was a motel room." A pause. "Jesus, James. Okay, I'll make some calls. But you know the system. Without hard evidence or Tommy being in immediate danger that we can prove, then we make our own evidence," James said. "I'm going to find them." After hanging up, James turned to Catherine. "I need you to stay here and coordinate with Christian. I'm going to Florida." "James, wait." Catherine placed her hand on his arm. "I know what you're thinking, but if you go down there and do something that lands you in prison, you can't help Tommy." James looked at his wife, the woman who'd stood by him through PTSD nightmares and the difficult early years of building his business. She was right. But the image of Tommy's bandaged eyes burned in his mind. "I won't do anything stupid," he said. But I'm not leaving my nephew with those monsters. As he packed his gear, items that most civilians wouldn't recognize but that had kept him alive in hostile territories, James thought about his sister. Sandra had been his best friend growing up, the one who'd covered for him when he'd gotten in trouble, who'd cried when he'd enlisted. But Rick had changed her, isolated her from the family, turned her into someone James barely recognized. The question was she a victim too, or had she become complicit in hurting her own child? Either way, James Pierce was going to get answers. And if Rick Stevenson thought he could hurt a child and disappear, he was about to learn what happened when you crossed a man who'd survived 3 tours in Afghanistan and had resources most people couldn't imagine. The war was coming to Rick Stevenson's doorstep. He just didn't know it yet. Chapter 2. The Hunt Begins. James's flight landed in Tampa at 6 a.m. He'd used a 5-hour flight to build a comprehensive profile of Rick Stevenson, and what he'd found made his jaw clench with barely controlled fury. Rick was a classic predator. 32 years old, he'd bounced between jobs his entire adult life, leaving behind a trail of workplace harassment complaints and restraining orders from ex-girlfriends. He'd met Sandra at a vulnerable time, just after their father's death 2 years ago, and had systematically isolated her from friends and family. The pattern was textbook manipulation, love bombing, gradual control, financial dependence, and finally violence. James had seen it before in domestic abuse cases during his military police days. What made this worse was that Tommy had become a target. At the Tampa airport, James rented a black Ford F-150 under one of his business aliases, something his security consulting work made legally possible. He drove to Clearwater, using the GPS coordinates from Rick's last credit card transaction. The Sunset Motel was exactly what James expected, a rundown establishment that catered to people who paid cash and didn't want questions asked. The desk clerk, a wiry man with suspicious eyes, initially claimed he didn't remember anyone matching Rick and Sandra's description. James placed $200 bills on the counter. "My nephew is 3 years old. He's been hurt. I just want to find him and make sure he's safe." The clerk's demeanor shifted when he saw the money. Room 237. But they checked out yesterday morning. In a hurry, too. Left a lot of stuff behind. What kind of stuff? Clothes, food, and this. The clerk produced a small teddy bear that James recognized as Tommy's favorite. The sight of it hit him like a physical blow. Did they say where they were going? The man asked about boats. Wanted to know about charter services to the Caribbean. James felt pieces clicking into place. Rick wasn't just running. He was planning to disappear entirely. Islands in the Caribbean where a man with cash could blend in, where extradition was complicated, where a child's cries wouldn't be heard. He drove to the Clearwater Marina, his military training helping him assess the layout quickly. There were dozens of charter services, but only a few that would take passengers without extensive documentation. James's experience in tracking high-value targets in Afghanistan served him well as he methodically worked his way through the possibilities. At the third charter service, he hit pay dirt. The owner, a sunburned man named Pete Casey, initially denied knowing anything. But when James showed him Tommy's picture and explained the situation, Pete's expression changed. "That poor kid," Pete muttered. "Yeah, they were here." The man was real aggressive, paid cash for a 3-day trip to the Bahamas. But something felt off. "What do you mean?" The woman seemed scared. "And the kid?" "Jesus, he had those bandages on his eyes, kept asking when he could see again." The man told him to shut up. James's hands clenched. "When do they come back?" "Tomorrow evening. Dock 15. But listen, if you're thinking of doing something." "I'm thinking of saving a child," James said. His phone buzzed with a text from Christian. Bolo issued. "FBI interested. Child services involved. But no immediate jurisdiction in international waters." James typed back, "Understood. We'll handle." He spent the rest of the day preparing. His security business had taught him the value of proper planning, and his military background had shown him the importance of having contingencies. He rented a boat, slipped 2 docks away from where Rick's charter would return. He acquired equipment that would help him document what he found: cameras, recording devices, medical supplies. Most importantly, he called in a favor from Angelo Thayer, a former Delta Force medic who now worked as a private investigator in Miami. Angelo agreed to drive up with a medical kit specifically designed for treating eye injuries. What are we walking into? Angelo asked when he arrived that evening. A child abuse situation. The abusers are returning from a 3-day boat trip tomorrow. I need to get the kid to safety and make sure the people who hurt him face consequences. Angelo, a tall black man with surgical scars on his hands from an IED explosion in Iraq, nodded grimly. What do you need from me? Medical assessment of the child. Documentation of injuries. And if things go sideways. I've got your back, Angelo said. Like old times. That night, James positioned himself where he could observe the marina. His patience, honed by countless hours of surveillance in hostile territory, served him well. At 2 a.m., he saw movement on a boat 3 slips down from where Rick's charter was expected to return. Through binoculars, he watched a man who matched Rick's description making a phone call. James used a parabolic microphone, standard equipment for his security work, to listen in. Won't be a problem much longer, Rick was saying. The kid's injuries will heal, but he won't remember much. And if he does, who's going to believe a 3-year-old who says daddy hurt him? James's blood ran cold. He was listening to a man planning to permanently damage a child's eyesight to cover up abuse. The wife's completely under control now, Rick continued. She knows what happens if she talks. After we settle in the islands, we'll start fresh. Maybe have another kid who learns to behave from the beginning. James had heard enough. He activated a recording app on his phone and continued listening, gathering evidence that would ensure Rick Stevenson never hurt another child. By dawn, he had a complete plan. Rick and Sandra would return that evening, expecting to blend back into normal life before disappearing permanently. Instead, they would find James Pierce waiting for them. And this time, there would be no running. Chapter 3, The Trap Springs. The charter boat Ocean's Dream pulled into Dock 15 at 6:47 p.m., 17 minutes behind schedule. James watched through high-powered binoculars from his concealed position in a waterfront restaurant, every muscle in his body coiled with controlled tension. Rick Stevenson was the first off the boat, moving with the false confidence of a man who thought he'd covered his tracks. He was smaller than James had expected, 5'9", maybe 170 pounds, but carried himself with the aggressive posture of someone who made up for physical shortcomings through intimidation and violence. Sandra came next, and James's heart broke seeing his sister. She'd lost at least 20 pounds since he'd last seen her in person, her once bright eyes now dull and hollow. She moved carefully, like someone who'd learned that sudden movements brought punishment. Then Tommy appeared, still wearing the same bandages, his small hand clutching a handrail as he carefully stepped off the boat. Even from a distance, James could see the child's confusion and fear. James activated his throat mic, connecting him to Angelo, who was positioned in a rented car near the marina's exit. Package has landed. 3 subjects confirmed. Moving to intercept. Copy that. Medical standing by. Christian's ETA is 15 minutes. James had spent the day setting up what military tacticians called a controlled environment. The marina had only 2 exits, one by land, one by water. The water exit was blocked by a Coast Guard training exercise that Christian had arranged through official channels. The land exit was being watched by Angelo. More importantly, James had used his security industry connections to install temporary surveillance equipment throughout the marina. Everything that happened in the next hour would be recorded from multiple angles. As Rick's family gathered their luggage, James watched Rick make another phone call. The parabolic microphone picked up fragments. Tomorrow night, private airfield, new passports ready. James's jaw tightened. Rick had planned this meticulously. A charter boat to stay off the radar, followed by a private flight using forged documents. Without intervention, Tommy would disappear forever. Moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive in Afghanistan, James approached Dock 15. He wore casual clothes that concealed body armor and various tools of his trade. To any observer, he looked like another marina visitor. Rick was arguing with the charter captain about additional fees when James stepped into view. "Hello, Sandra," James said quietly. His sister spun around, her face going white. "James, what are you? How did you?" Rick's head snapped up, his expression shifting instantly from surprise to calculation. Well, the famous war hero brother. Sandra told me you might try to stick your nose where it doesn't belong. Uncle James. Tommy's voice cut through the tension, filled with desperate hope. Uncle James, is that you? I still can't see. James knelt to Tommy's level, his voice gentle despite the rage burning in his chest. I'm here, buddy. Everything's going to be okay now. Nobody asked you to come, Rick said, stepping forward aggressively. This is a family matter. You're right, James said, standing slowly. It is a family matter. Tommy is my family. Sandra is my family. You. His gray eyes locked onto Rick's. You're a problem I'm going to solve. Rick laughed, but there was nervousness behind it. Big tough soldier boy. You think you can just show up and take over? I've got rights. Sandra's my wife. Tommy's my stepson. You've got no legal standing here. You want to talk about legal standing? James pulled out his phone, playing the recording of Rick's conversation from the night before. The marina's acoustics carried the words clearly. The kid's injuries will heal, but he won't remember much. And if he does, who's going to believe a 3-year-old who says Daddy hurt him? Sandra gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Rick, you said it was an accident. Shut up, Rick snapped at her, his mask slipping completely. Don't listen to him, Sandra. He's trying to break up our family. Break up your family? James stepped closer, his voice dropping to the deadly, quiet tone that had terrified enemy combatants. You put your hands on a 3-year-old child. You damaged his eyes. You've been planning to disappear with him to a place where no one would ever find him again. The charter captain, who'd been watching the exchange with growing concern, suddenly started his boat's engine. I don't want any part of this, he called out, backing away from the dock. Rick's eyes darted around, looking for escape routes. James could see the moment when Rick realized he was trapped. Sandra, Rick said, his voice taking on the manipulative tone James had heard before. Remember what we talked about. Remember what happens if you betray me. But Sandra was staring at her brother, tears streaming down her face. James, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. He said if I ever contacted you or Mom, he'd hurt Tommy worse. He said Tommy's accidents were my fault for not controlling him better. The admission hung in the air like a physical presence. Rick's face twisted with fury. You stupid bitch, he snarled, raising his hand toward Sandra. James moved faster than Rick could process, his combat training taking over. One moment Rick was threatening Sandra. The next he was face down on the dock with his arm twisted behind his back in a perfect submission hold. Here's what's going to happen, James said conversationally, applying just enough pressure to make Rick gasp. Detective Holland is about 2 minutes away. Angelo, he gestured toward the parking lot where Angelo was now visible, is going to examine Tommy's injuries and document everything. You're going to confess to everything you've done, and you're going to pray that Tommy's injuries aren't permanent. You can't prove anything, Rick wheezed. I've got recordings of you planning to permanently blind a child to cover up abuse. I've got medical records showing a pattern of suspicious injuries. I've got witness testimony from the charter captain and the motel clerk. James leaned closer. But mostly, I've got a very detailed understanding of how to make someone's life extremely unpleasant, and I've got the resources to make it stick. The sound of sirens filled the air as Christian arrived with backup units. Angelo jogged over with his medical kit, heading straight for Tommy. It's over, Rick, James said. The only question now is whether you cooperate and maybe get a plea deal, or whether you fight this and spend the rest of your life learning what happens to child abusers in federal prison. As the police took Rick into custody, James finally allowed himself to breathe. Tommy was safe. Sandra was free. And Rick Stevenson was about to discover that some people, when you threaten their family, become forces of nature that no amount of running can escape. But James knew this was just the beginning. The real reckoning was still to come. Chapter 4. Unraveling the Web. The Clearwater Police Station buzzed with activity as Detective Christian Holland coordinated with FBI agents, Child Protective Services, and medical personnel. In a sterile conference room, James sat with Sandra while Angelo completed his examination of Tommy in the adjacent medical bay. Sandra had been talking for 3 hours straight, the words pouring out of her like a dam had burst. James listened with growing horror as she detailed 2 years of systematic psychological and physical abuse that had escalated to the point where Rick had begun targeting Tommy. He said he was teaching Tommy discipline, Sandra whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. That little boys needed to learn respect. But it kept getting worse. The accidents started happening more often. Dr. Evelyn Swanson, a child psychologist who specialized in abuse cases, sat across from them taking notes. Sandra, I need to ask about Tommy's eyes specifically. What did Rick tell you happened? Sandra's hands shook as she spoke. Tommy spilled apple juice on Rick's laptop 3 days ago. Rick went into one of his rages. He grabbed Tommy and he said he was going to teach him to be more careful by making him understand what it meant to lose something precious. James felt his hands clench into fists under the table. He did this deliberately. He put something in Tommy's eyes, Sandra continued. Some kind of industrial cleaner from his work. Said it would teach Tommy a lesson about being clumsy. When Tommy started screaming and couldn't see, I wanted to take him to the hospital, but Rick said if I did, he'd kill us both. Dr. Swanson leaned forward. Sandra, what kind of work does Rick do? Pool maintenance for hotels. He has access to all kinds of chemicals. James exchanged a look with Christian, who had been taking notes in the corner. Chemical burns to the eyes could cause permanent damage, but if treated quickly, there was hope for recovery. Angelo entered the room, his expression grim but not hopeless. The good news is that Tommy's injuries are consistent with chemical exposure, not physical trauma. The corneas show damage, but it's not as severe as it could have been. With proper treatment, we're looking at partial vision loss, not complete blindness. Sandra broke down, sobbing with relief. James put his arm around his sister, feeling her fragile frame shake against him. The bad news, Angelo continued, is that waiting 3 days before proper treatment means there's permanent scarring. Tommy will need multiple surgeries and may never have full vision. What about criminal charges? James asked Christian. With Sandra's testimony, the medical evidence, and your recordings, we've got Rick dead to rights on aggravated child abuse, false imprisonment, and criminal conspiracy. The FBI is adding kidnapping charges since he transported Tommy across state lines. He's looking at 25 to life. But James wasn't satisfied. During his military career, he'd learned that sometimes the legal system wasn't enough. Sometimes justice required a more personal touch. I need to talk to Rick, James said. Christian frowned. James, he's already lawyered up. Anything you say to him won't be part of any legal proceeding, James finished. This is personal. An hour later, James sat across from Rick Stevenson in a holding cell interview room. Rick had the sullen expression of a man who'd been caught, but wasn't ready to admit defeat. Come to gloat, Rick asked. Come to give you a choice, James replied. You've got 2 paths ahead of you. Path 1, you fight the charges, go to trial, and spend the next 25 years in general population. Child abusers don't do well in prison, Rick. I'm sure you've heard. Rick's tough guy facade cracked slightly. What's path 2? You plead guilty to everything, provide full cooperation in documenting what you did to Tommy, and accept whatever sentence the judge gives you. In exchange, I make sure you're placed in protective custody where you won't have to worry about what other inmates think of men who blind children. And why would you do that for me? James leaned forward, his voice dropping to the quiet intensity that had once commanded soldiers in combat. Because I want you to live, Rick. I want you to spend every single day for the next quarter century thinking about what you did to a 3-year-old boy. I want you to know that Tommy is growing up safe and loved, getting the medical care he needs while you're counting down the days in a cell. Rick's hands trembled slightly. You think you're so much better than me. I know I am. But more importantly, Tommy knows he's safe now. Sandra knows she's free. And you know that if you ever get out of prison, if you ever even think about going near another child, I'll be watching. James stood to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Rick, that job you had with the pool maintenance company? Turns out they've been looking for someone who's been stealing chemicals for months. Amazing how evidence turns up when people start really looking. Rick's face went white as James left the room. The theft charges would add another 5 years to his sentence. Back in the main part of the station, James found Tommy sitting with Catherine, who had flown down that morning. His nephew was coloring with crayons, the bandages replaced with smaller patches that allowed partial vision. "Uncle James!" Tommy called out when he heard his voice. "The nice doctor says my eyes are going to get better." James knelt beside his nephew, fighting back emotion. "That's right, buddy. You're going to be just fine. Is the bad man going away?" James looked at his nephew's partially bandaged face, thinking of all the healing that lay ahead, physical and emotional. "Yes, Tommy, the bad man is going away forever." As the family prepared to return home, James received a call from an unexpected source. Julius Dawson, a private investigator who specialized in tracking down deadbeat parents and abusive spouses. "Pierce, I heard what happened in Florida. I've got some information you might find interesting about your brother-in-law's background." "What kind of information?" "The kind that suggests Tommy and Sandra weren't his first victims, and the kind that means Rick Stevenson has been living under a false identity for the past 5 years. James felt a cold smile spread across his face. Rick's nightmare was just beginning. Chapter 5. The Past Comes Calling. Julius Dawson's office in downtown Atlanta was filled with filing cabinets, computer monitors, and the organized chaos of a man who made his living digging up secrets. When James arrived the next morning, leaving Tommy in Catherine's care at the hotel, Julius was already spreading photographs and documents across his desk. "Your boy Rick Stevenson," Julius said without preamble. "His real name is Richard Cahill, and he's got a very interesting history." James studied the photographs. A younger Rick, Richard, with different hair, different clothes, but the same cold eyes. What kind of history? 5 years ago, Richard Cahill was married to a woman named Jen Dow in Kansas City. They had a 4-year-old daughter named Emma. Julius pulled out a police report. One day, Jen came home to find Emma unconscious with severe head trauma. Richard claimed the girl had fallen down the stairs. James felt his stomach clench. What happened? Emma survived, but with permanent brain damage. Jen divorced Richard and got full custody. Richard disappeared before the criminal trial could proceed. Julius pulled out more documents. The interesting part is that Jen has been looking for him ever since. Not for revenge, for closure. She wants Emma to know what happened to her. Where are they now? Jen works as a nurse in Kansas City. Emma is 9 years old and attends a special school for children with traumatic brain injuries. Julius handed James a photograph of a young girl with bright eyes and leg braces. Jen says Emma still asks about her daddy sometimes, wondering if the accident was her fault. James stared at the photograph, thinking of Tommy's bandaged eyes. The pattern was becoming clear. Rick targeted vulnerable families, used charm and manipulation to gain control, then escalated to violence when his victims couldn't meet his impossible standards. "There's more," Julius continued. "I found 2 other families. A divorced mother in Denver whose 6-year-old son suffered accidental burns. A widow in Phoenix whose daughter ended up in the hospital with internal injuries. Both times, Richard disappeared when authorities started asking questions. How many children has this monster hurt? At least 4 that I can document. Probably more." Julius leaned back in his chair. The good news is that all these cases are still open. With Richard now in custody as Rick Stevenson, we can finally give these families some answers. James pulled out his phone and called Christian. "I need you to conference in with Kansas City PD, Denver PD, and Phoenix PD. We've got a serial child abuser with victims in multiple states." Over the next 6 hours, the true scope of Rick's crimes became clear. Each jurisdiction had similar stories. A charming man who swept vulnerable mothers off their feet, gained access to their children, and then systematically abused them while psychologically destroying the mother's ability to seek help. But the most shocking revelation came when Julius ran Rick's fingerprints through expanded databases. "Jesus Christ," Julius whispered, staring at his computer screen. "James, you need to see this." The screen showed military records. Rick had served briefly in the Army before being dishonorably discharged for assault. But more importantly, it showed his original identity, Richard Cahill, son of a convicted child molester who had died in prison when Richard was 16. "Cycle of abuse," James said grimly. "His father hurt him, so he hurts children. Gets worse, Julius said. According to juvenile records that were supposed to be sealed, Richard spent 2 years in foster care after his father's arrest. 3 different families reported behavioral problems, violence toward younger children, animal cruelty, the whole profile of a developing psychopath. James thought about Sandra, about how Rick had isolated her from family and friends, how he convinced her that Tommy's injuries were somehow her fault. The manipulation was textbook, practiced over years of targeting vulnerable families. His phone rang. Christian's voice was tight with anger. James, we've got a problem. Rick's lawyer is claiming his confession was coerced. He's saying you threatened him illegally, and they want all charges dropped. On what grounds? They're claiming you operated as an unlicensed bounty hunter, that you illegally detained him, and that any evidence gathered as a result of your vigilante actions is inadmissible. James felt his jaw clench. Rick's lawyer was using James's military and security background against him, painting him as a dangerous vigilante who had overstepped legal boundaries. What does that mean for Tommy's case? It means we need to be very careful about how we proceed. The recordings you made are being challenged. Your sister's testimony might not be enough if they can claim it was given under duress. James ended the call and turned to Julius. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. If the legal system fails, if Rick somehow walks free or gets a reduced sentence, what would you do? Julius studied James's face for a long moment. I'd remember that sometimes justice happens outside courtrooms. And I'd remember that men like Richard Cahill don't stop hurting children until someone makes them stop. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to ensure that Rick Stevenson never hurt another child, regardless of what the courts decide, what would that look like? Hypothetically, Julius smiled grimly. That would look like a man with Richard's background and criminal history getting placed in general population in a prison where information about child abusers tends to spread quickly. It would look like making sure every inmate knows exactly what he did to a 3-year-old's eyes. James nodded slowly. And hypothetically, if someone wanted to make sure the families of his other victims got closure, that would look like someone with resources and connections ensuring that cold cases get reopened, that evidence gets properly processed, and that justice gets served even if it's 20 years late. As James left Julius's office, he had a clear understanding of what needed to happen. The legal system would get first crack at Rick Stevenson. But if the system failed, James Pierce had other options. Rick had made the mistake of targeting James's family. Now he was about to learn that some mistakes have consequences that extend far beyond courtrooms and plea bargains. The reckoning was far from over. Chapter 6. The Courtroom Battle. 3 months later, the Pinellas County Courthouse was packed for the preliminary hearing that would determine Rick Stevenson's fate. James sat in the front row with Sandra and Catherine, watching Tommy color quietly in a special notebook. His nephew's vision had improved with surgery, but he still wore protective glasses and would for the rest of his life. District Attorney Frances Bridges was a formidable prosecutor known for her work on child abuse cases. She'd taken Rick's case personally after seeing the medical reports and hearing Tommy's testimony. Across the aisle, Rick's defense attorney, Daryl Carpenter, was a slick criminal lawyer known for getting violent offenders reduced sentences through technicalities. The state calls Dr. Angelo Thayer, DA, Bridges announced. Angelo took the stand wearing his dress uniform, his military decorations visible. He'd testified in dozens of cases involving child abuse, and his combination of medical expertise and combat credibility made him nearly unshakable. Dr. Thayer, based on your examination of Tommy Stevenson, what was your medical conclusion regarding his injuries? The child sustained severe chemical burns to both corneas, consistent with direct application of industrial-strength pool cleaning chemicals. The pattern of injury suggests deliberate placement rather than accidental exposure. In your opinion, could these injuries have been accidental? Absolutely not. The concentration of chemical residue, the bilateral nature of the burns, and the precision of the damage indicate intentional application with the goal of causing maximum harm to the child's vision. Defense Attorney Carpenter stood for cross-examination. Dr. Thayer, you're not an ophthalmologist, are you? No, but I have extensive training in trauma medicine and chemical injuries from my military service. And this examination was conducted at the request of James Pierce, your former military colleague, correct? I was asked to provide medical assistance to an injured child. But you're hardly an objective observer, are you? You and Mr. Pierce served together. You owe him your life according to military records, and you have a personal relationship that might bias your testimony. D.A. Bridges objected, but James could see where Carpenter was going. He was trying to paint the entire investigation as a personal vendetta by James, undermining the credibility of every witness. The next witness was Sandra, and James watched his sister take the stand with quiet pride. The broken woman Rick had created was gone, replaced by someone determined to protect her son and speak the truth. Mrs. Stevenson, you were married to the defendant for 2 years? Yes. During that time, did you observe him physically abuse your son? Sandra's voice was steady despite her tears. Multiple times. He said he was teaching Tommy discipline, but it was violence. The incident with Tommy's eyes wasn't the first time Rick deliberately hurt him. Carpenter's cross-examination was brutal. He painted Sandra as an unstable woman seeking revenge against her ex-husband, questioned her memory, and suggested she might have caused Tommy's injuries herself. James watched Sandra weather the assault with growing admiration for her strength. The prosecution's case seemed solid until Carpenter called his first witness, Dr. Cliff Woodward, a psychiatrist who specialized in false memory syndrome. Dr. Woodward, is it possible for a 3-year-old child to have false memories implanted through suggestion? Absolutely. Young children are extremely susceptible to leading questions and can quickly develop detailed memories of events that never occurred. In your opinion, could Tommy Stevenson's testimony about his stepfather deliberately hurting his eyes be the result of coaching by family members? Given the family dynamics and the clear animosity between the defendant and the child's uncle, it's not only possible but probable. James felt his stomach drop. Carpenter was systematically undermining every piece of evidence, painting James as a vigilante who had manipulated his sister and nephew to frame an innocent man. The hearing recessed for lunch, and James stepped outside to clear his head. He found Christian waiting by his car. "How bad is it?" James asked. "Bad. Carpenter's good at what he does. He's creating reasonable doubt by making you the villain of the story." "What about the recordings?" "He's claiming they were obtained illegally, that you had no authority to surveil Rick, and that the chain of custody is compromised because you're not law enforcement." James's phone buzzed with a text from Julius. "Need to meet. Found something that changes everything." An hour later, James sat in Julius's car in the courthouse parking lot as the private investigator explained his latest discovery. "I've been digging deeper into Richard Cahill's background," Julius said. "Remember how he was dishonorably discharged from the Army? I got hold of the actual court-martial records." "What did you find?" "He was discharged for sexually assaulting a fellow soldier's 8-year-old daughter during a base family event. The case was covered up to avoid scandal, but the records still exist." James felt a surge of grim satisfaction. That's a pattern of behavior that predates everything else. Gets better. The victim from the Army case? She's now 26 years old and works as a victim's advocate in North Carolina. Her name is Lori Bradford, and she's been following Richard's case online. She wants to testify. Will they let her? Not in this hearing, but if this goes to trial, her testimony about Richard's pattern of behavior toward children will be admissible. Plus, I found records of 3 other military families who reported concerns about Richard's behavior around children. The Army transferred him repeatedly to avoid problems, but they documented everything. James thought quickly. If Carpenter succeeded in getting the charges reduced or dismissed based on technicalities, Rick might walk free. But if the case went to full trial, all of Richard's history would become admissible evidence. "Julius, I need you to do something for me. I need you to make sure that certain information reaches the media. Not anything that would compromise the trial, but enough to ensure that public pressure keeps this case in the spotlight." "What kind of information?" "The fact that Richard Cahill has been using false identities to prey on vulnerable families for years. The fact that there are multiple victims across multiple states. The fact that this case represents a chance to finally hold a serial child abuser accountable." As they spoke, James saw Carpenter leaving the courthouse with Rick's parents, an elderly couple who had driven down from Georgia to support their son. James made a mental note to have Julius investigate them as well. The cycle of abuse often went back generations. When court resumed, D.A. Bridges called her final witness, Tommy himself. James watched his nephew walk carefully to the witness stand, his protective glasses catching the courtroom lights. "Tommy, do you know the difference between the truth and a lie?" "Yes, ma'am. The truth is what really happened." "Did your stepfather Rick hurt your eyes?" Tommy's small voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom. "Yes. He was mad because I spilled juice. He put the burning stuff in my eyes and said I needed to learn to be careful." "Did anyone tell you to say that?" "No, ma'am. I remember it. It hurt really bad." Carpenter's cross-examination of a 3-year-old was brief and careful. Even he couldn't risk appearing to bully a child victim in front of a judge. But James could see the doubt in the judge's eyes. That evening, James got a call from D.A. Bridges. The judge is going to allow the case to proceed to trial, but he's reduced the charges. Aggravated child abuse is now simple assault. Kidnapping is now unlawful restraint. Rick's looking at maybe 5 years instead of 25. James hung up and turned to Catherine. "The system is failing. What are you going to do?" James looked at his wife, the woman who had stood by him through war and peace, who understood that sometimes good men had to make hard choices. "I'm going to make sure Rick Stevenson never hurts another child," he said quietly. "Whatever it takes." The legal battle was just the beginning. The real war was about to start. Chapter 7. The Network Unveiled. The news broke on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before Rick's trial was scheduled to begin. Local investigative reporter Natasha Harden had been working with Julius Dawson to piece together Richard Cahill's trail of victims across multiple states, and her exposé sent shockwaves through the criminal justice system. Serial child abuser operated under false identities for years, read the headline across the front page of the Tampa Bay Tribune. The article detailed not just Rick's crimes, but the systematic failures that had allowed him to continue hurting children by simply changing his name and moving to a new state. James sat in his hotel room, watching the story unfold on national news. Within hours, CNN and Fox News had picked up the story. By evening, Richard Cahill was trending on social media, and tips were pouring in from around the country. His phone rang. D.A. Bridges sounded exhausted but determined. "James, this changes everything. The FBI is taking over the case. We're looking at federal charges now, pattern of abuse across state lines, use of false identities to commit crimes, potential connection to organized trafficking." What does that mean for Tommy's case? It means Rick's going away forever, but the trial is going to be delayed while federal investigators expand the scope. They want to make sure they get everyone involved. Everyone involved? Your investigator friend found some interesting financial records. Rick didn't just change identities randomly. Someone helped him. Someone with access to official documents, social security numbers, the works. This might be bigger than one man hurting children. After hanging up, James called Julius. "What else did you find? Remember Rick's parents? Donnie and Ruth Goodrich? I ran their finances. In the past 5 years, they've received regular cash deposits totaling over $200,000. Always from different sources, always in amounts just under the federal reporting threshold." James felt pieces clicking into place. They were funding his operations. Gets worse. I found connections to 3 other families in Georgia who have similar financial patterns. All of them have adult children with criminal records involving violence against women and children. All of them have been receiving regular cash payments. You're telling me there's a network? I'm telling me there's an organized system for helping violent men disappear and reestablish themselves in new communities. Rick wasn't working alone. He was part of something bigger. That evening, James received an unexpected visitor at his hotel. FBI Special Agent Everett Knapp was a tall, lean man with the kind of quiet intensity that came from years of hunting predators. "Mr. Pierce, I understand you've been conducting your own investigation into Richard Cahill's activities. I've been trying to protect my nephew and get justice for his abuser. And you've done exceptional work. The evidence you've gathered has been invaluable. But now I need to ask you to step back and let us handle this. James studied the FBI agent. Why? Because we believe Richard Cahill is connected to a network that's been operating for at least a decade. They help violent offenders disappear and restart their lives in new communities. They target single mothers, widows, divorced women with children. The children are a secondary market. James felt his blood go cold. Secondary market? We think some of these men are filming their abuse and selling it. We think children are being trafficked between members of the network. What happened to your nephew might be just the tip of the iceberg. Then why do you want me to step back? Agent Knapp leaned forward. Because these people have killed to protect their operation. 2 women who tried to expose members of the network died in accidents in the past 3 years. A private investigator in Oregon who got too close disappeared completely. James thought of Catherine, of Tommy, of all the families who had trusted Rick. What do you need from me? Your cooperation. Full access to everything you found. And your word that you won't take any independent action that might compromise our investigation. And in return, we make sure Richard Cahill and everyone connected to him never hurts another child. This network is going down, Mr. Pierce. All of it. James was quiet for a long moment, thinking of all the ways the system had already failed Tommy and the other victims. Agent Knapp, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I've learned not to put all my faith in official channels. What does that mean? It means I'll cooperate with your investigation. I'll share everything I've found, but I'm not stepping back completely. If your official channels fail, if bureaucracy and legal technicalities let these monsters slip through the cracks, I'm going to handle things my way. Agent Knapp's expression was grim, but understanding. I was hoping you wouldn't say that, but you're not surprised. No, I've read your military record, Mr. Pierce. I know what you're capable of. I'm asking you to give us a chance to do this right. How long? 6 months. We think we can roll up the entire network in 6 months if we move carefully. James considered this. 6 months was a long time for dangerous men to remain free, but if the FBI could truly dismantle the entire operation. I'll give you 6 months, James said finally. But if even one child gets hurt while you're building your case, if even one of these bastards walks free on a technicality, the deal is off. Agent Knapp nodded grimly. Understood. As the FBI agent left, James's phone rang. It was Sandra, calling from home where she and Tommy were staying with their mother. James, something's wrong. There was a man watching the house today. When Mom went to check, he drove away quickly. James felt his protective instincts surge. Pack a bag. I'm sending someone to get you. James, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. This thing with Rick is bigger than we thought, and the people involved don't leave loose ends. James immediately called Angelo, Christian, and Julius. Within an hour, Sandra and Tommy were in protective custody at a safe house that James's security company maintained for high-risk clients. That night, James sat alone in his hotel room, cleaning the Glock 19 that he'd carried through 3 tours in Afghanistan. The FBI wanted 6 months to build a case. The legal system wanted evidence and procedure and proper channels. But James had spent too many years in places where good men died because they followed rules that evil men ignored. If the network thought they could intimidate his family, they were about to learn that James Pierce didn't intimidate easily. The war was escalating, and James intended to win it. Chapter 8. The Reckoning Begins. The safe house was a nondescript ranch home in a gated community outside Atlanta, equipped with military-grade security systems and manned by former Special Operations personnel. James arrived at dawn, finding Tommy playing with toy soldiers while Sandra watched the news coverage of Rick's expanded federal case. Uncle James! Tommy ran to him, his protective glasses slightly askew. Are the bad men really gone? James knelt to his nephew's level, straightening the glasses gently. We're making sure they can't hurt anyone anymore, buddy. Sandra looked up from the television. They're saying Rick was part of some kind of organization, that there might be dozens of men like him. The FBI is handling it, James said, though his tone suggested limited confidence in that approach. But what if they don't catch them all? What if some of them come after Tommy because he testified? James met his sister's eyes. That's not going to happen. His phone buzzed with a text from Agent Knapp. Network made first move. Safe house in Oregon hit last night. Family relocated, but they know we're closing in. James stepped outside to call Knapp back. How bad? They firebombed the house at 3 a.m. Family was already relocated, but the message was clear. They're willing to kill witnesses. Any leads on who's running this? We think the center of operations is in Georgia, near where Rick's parents live. We've identified at least 12 men who've used the identity-changing service over the past decade. All violent offenders, all with histories of targeting families with children. And how many children have been hurt while you've been building your case? A pause. We found evidence of at least 30 victims across 8 states. But James, if we move too fast, if you move too slow, more kids get hurt. James's voice was granite. I'm coming to Georgia. James, don't do anything that compromises the investigation. I'm not going to compromise anything. I'm going to end it. James hung up and went back inside. Sandra was helping Tommy build a fort out of couch cushions, both of them laughing for the first time in months. The sight strengthened his resolve. He called Julius. I need everything you have on the Goodrich family and their associates in Georgia. Addresses, financial records, known associates, daily routines. James, the FBI told me to stop. The FBI doesn't sign your paychecks. I do. And right now, I need information more than I need official cooperation. Within hours, Julius had provided a comprehensive dossier on the network's Georgia operations. Donnie and Ruth Goodrich lived on a compound outside Valdosta, Georgia, with several outbuildings and what appeared to be a sophisticated communication setup. Bank records showed payments to a lawyer named Patrick Rogers who specialized in creating new identities, a corrupt county clerk named Ted Diaz who provided official documents, and a private investigator named Vince Hatfield who specialized in finding vulnerable targets. James studied aerial photographs of the compound, using his military training to assess defensive positions and approach routes. This wasn't going to be a legal operation. It was going to be a tactical strike designed to gather intelligence and eliminate threats. That evening, he called a meeting with Angelo and 2 other former special operations personnel who worked for his security company. Jeremy Carney, a former Navy SEAL, and Freddie Doherty, a former Army Ranger. They met at a private airfield outside Atlanta, where James maintained aircraft for his business. Gentlemen, I'm about to ask you to participate in something that exists in a legal gray area, James said. We're going after a network of people who hurt children. The FBI is moving too slowly, and more kids are getting hurt while they build their case. Jeremy, a compact man with suspicious eyes, spoke first. What kind of gray area? The kind where we gather intelligence through methods that wouldn't be admissible in court. The kind where we make sure certain people understand that hurting children has consequences. Freddie, tall and quiet, nodded slowly. What's the target? James spread out the aerial photographs and dossiers. The Goodrich compound. Intelligence suggests it's the hub of an operation that's been helping child abusers establish new identities and find new victims. We go in, we gather evidence, and we make it clear that this operation is finished. Rules of engagement? Angelo asked. Everyone comes home alive. But if someone threatens any of you, you respond appropriately. If we find evidence of active child abuse, we extract the children first and worry about legal niceties later. The team spent the next 4 hours planning the operation. It would be a night insertion using night vision and suppressed weapons. They would disable security systems, gather electronic evidence, and document everything they found. If they encountered resistance, they would neutralize it with minimal force. James was careful not to mention that he had additional plans for the network's leadership, plans that didn't involve arrests or trials. At 0200 hours, the team inserted via helicopter into woods 2 miles from the Goodrich compound. James led them through the darkness using GPS and night vision. Their movements silent and coordinated after years of similar operations in hostile territory. The compound was larger than the aerial photos had suggested. 6 buildings spread across 20 acres, with a main house, several outbuildings, and what appeared to be a communication center. James counted 4 vehicles and estimated 6, to 8 occupants based on the lights and activity patterns. Angelo, take the communications building. Jeremy, the main house. Freddie, you're with me on the outbuildings. We're looking for computers, files, evidence of the children they've trafficked. What they found was worse than James had imagined. The first outbuilding contained a sophisticated video production setup with bondage equipment and children's clothing in various sizes. The second building housed a server farm with terabytes of child abuse material organized by victim age and type of abuse. James felt his hands shake with rage as he documented everything with his camera. This wasn't just about helping violent men find new victims. This was an organized child abuse production and distribution network. His radio crackled with Angelo's voice. James, you need to see this. I've got financial records showing payments to judges, police officials, and Child Protective Services workers across 8 states. This thing goes all the way to the top. Jeremy's voice followed. Main house is clear, but I found something. There's a basement with holding cells. They've been keeping children here. James's vision went red. Any current occupants? Negative, but the cells show recent use. James made a decision that would haunt prosecutors and delight victims' families for years to come. Instead of simply gathering evidence and leaving, he activated the compound's own security system and began uploading everything they'd found to FBI servers, news organizations, and victim advocacy groups simultaneously. Then he called Agent Knapp. Knapp here. Agent Knapp, this is James Pierce. I'm at the Goodrich compound in Georgia. You need to get teams here immediately. Jesus Christ, James. What have you done? I've done your job. The compound contains enough evidence to prosecute dozens of people for child trafficking, abuse, and production of child pornography. I'm transmitting everything to your field office now. Are you injured? Is anyone with you injured? We're fine. But Agent Knapp, I found holding cells. They've been keeping children here. This network isn't just helping abusers find victims. They're trafficking children for abuse and murder. The silence on the line stretched for 10 seconds. When Knapp spoke again, his voice was different. James, I need you to secure the scene and wait for my teams. Don't let anyone leave that compound. Copy that. As James waited for the FBI to arrive, he stood in the middle of the compound where child predators had operated for years, thinking of Tommy's bandaged eyes and all the other children who had suffered while bureaucrats worried about jurisdiction and proper procedure. The network's leadership would be in federal custody within hours. But James Pierce wasn't done with them yet. Some forms of justice couldn't be delivered in courtrooms. Chapter 9. Justice Served. 6 months later, James sat in the gallery of the federal courthouse in Atlanta, watching Rick Stevenson, now officially identified as Richard Cahill, receive his sentence. The judge's words carried the weight of absolute finality. Mr. Cahill, you have been found guilty of conspiracy to commit child trafficking, production and distribution of child pornography, aggravated assault on a minor, and operating under false identities to facilitate the abuse of children. This court sentences you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Tommy, now 4 years old and wearing his protective glasses, sat between Sandra and Catherine. He didn't fully understand the proceedings, but he understood that the bad man was going away forever. The network's takedown had been complete and devastating. The evidence James and his team had gathered at the Goodrich compound led to 247 arrests across 12 states. 36 children were rescued from active abuse situations. The corrupt officials who had enabled the network, including judges, police officers, and Child Protective Services workers, were facing their own federal trials. Rick's parents, Donnie and Ruth Goodrich, received 25 years each for their role in financing and coordinating the network. Lawyer Patrick Rogers, who had created the false identities, was sentenced to 15 years. The corrupt county clerk Ted Diaz received 10 years. Private investigator Vince Hatfield, who had helped target vulnerable families, received 12 years. But for James, the most satisfying moment had come 3 months earlier in a different kind of courtroom entirely. Federal Correctional Institution Victorville was a high-security prison in California where Richard Cahill had been transferred after his conviction. James had used his security clearance and law enforcement contacts to arrange a visit under the pretext of gathering additional intelligence about the network. Richard sat across from him in the visiting room, wearing prison orange and showing the effects of 3 months in general population. His face bore the marks of recent violence, and his eyes carried the constant wariness of a man who had learned that his reputation preceded him wherever he went. "You did this," Richard said without preamble. "You made sure everyone here knows what I did." "I didn't have to," James replied calmly. "Prison inmates have their own ways of finding out about child abusers. I just made sure the information was accurate. They're going to kill me. Probably, but not quickly." James leaned forward slightly. "You see, Richard, prison inmates have a particular hatred for men who hurt children. They tend to draw out that kind of justice over months or years." Richard's hands trembled slightly. "I want protective custody. You'll have to earn that. And earning it means providing information about network members who haven't been caught yet. It means helping the FBI find every child you and your associates abused. It means spending the rest of your life making amends for what you did to Tommy and all the others. And if I cooperate, then you might live long enough to die of old age in a cell. If you don't cooperate," James shrugged. "Well, you've seen what happens to child abusers in general population." Over the following weeks, Richard provided information that led to the arrests of 14 additional network members and the rescue of 7 more children. His cooperation earned him a transfer to protective custody, where he would spend the rest of his life in isolation, thinking about what he had done. The legal victory was complete, but James knew the real victory was simpler and more personal. Tommy's vision had improved significantly with multiple surgeries. He would never have perfect eyesight, but he could see well enough to play, to read, to live a normal life. More importantly, he was no longer afraid. Sandra had blossomed back into the sister James remembered from childhood, strong and confident and protective of her son. The network that had operated for years, helping violent men hurt children, was completely dismantled. The financial pipeline that had funded their operations was frozen. The corrupt officials who had enabled them were in prison. And Richard Cahill would spend the rest of his life paying for what he had done to a 3-year-old boy who had spilled apple juice. Standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, James felt Catherine's hand in his. Tommy ran ahead to play on the courthouse steps, his laughter echoing off the marble columns. "It's over," Catherine said. "This part is," James agreed. "But there are other networks out there, other children who need protecting." "What are you saying?" James watched his nephew play, remembering the bandages that had covered the boy's eyes, remembering the fear in Sandra's voice, remembering the cold calculation in Richard's eyes as he had planned to disappear with Tommy forever. "I'm saying that sometimes the system works, and sometimes good people have to step outside the system to make sure justice gets done." He turned to his wife. "My security company is going to start taking on more cases involving missing children and child abuse investigations." Catherine smiled. "Pro bono work. Some of it. The work that pays is funding the work that matters." Agent Knapp approached them as they prepared to leave. "James, I wanted to thank you again. Without your investigation and the evidence you gathered, we never would have broken this network. Without your federal resources, we never would have been able to prosecute all of them." "I have a proposition for you," Knapp said. "The Bureau could use someone with your skills and resources as a consultant. There are other networks out there, other children who need protecting." James looked at Tommy, who was showing Catherine a flower he'd picked from the courthouse garden. "What kind of consulting?" "The kind where you do what you do best, find the bad guys and gather evidence. And we handle the legal aftermath. The kind where good men with the right skills make sure children are safe." James thought about the holding cells at the Goodrich compound, about the 36 children who had been rescued, about all the children who were still out there somewhere, waiting for someone to save them. "I'll need operational independence. No bureaucratic oversight of tactical decisions. And if the system fails, if legal technicalities let predators walk free, then you handle it your way," Knapp finished. "Understood." As they walked to their car, Tommy ran back to James and took his hand. "Uncle James, are you going to keep helping kids like me?" James knelt to his nephew's level. looking into eyes that were clear and bright behind protective glasses. "Yes, buddy. I'm going to make sure kids like you are always safe." "Good," Tommy said with the absolute certainty of a 4-year-old. "Because you're really good at catching bad guys." James Pierce smiled as he stood up, thinking of all the networks still operating, all the children still in danger, all the work that remained to be done. Some people saw child abuse as a social problem, a legal issue, a matter for therapy and rehabilitation. James Pierce saw it as a war, and he intended to win every battle. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Call That Changed Everything. Warren Beard had been driving 18-wheelers for 8 years, but he'd never lost the military precision that had kept him alive in 3 tours overseas. At 42, his weathered hands gripped the steering wheel with the same steady control that had once held an M4 carbine in the mountains of Afghanistan. The highway stretched endlessly before him, a ribbon of asphalt through the Nevada desert, when his phone rang. Warren Beard. "Mr. Beard? This is Dr. Wesley Reyes from St. Mary's Hospital in Cedar Falls. I'm calling about your daughter, Emma." Warren's blood turned to ice. He'd been on day 10 of a cross-country haul, 3 days out from home. "What happened to my daughter? She was in a car accident this afternoon. She's stable now, but—" Dr. Reyes paused, and Warren could hear something else in his voice, anger barely contained. "Mr. Beard, I need to tell you something, and I probably shouldn't be the one doing it." Warren pulled his rig onto the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. "Tell me, the other driver was your wife's friend, Tony Monroe. He was drunk, and from what the witnesses are saying, it wasn't an accident. He deliberately ran the red light and T-boned the car Emma was in." The world seemed to tilt. Warren had suspected Alexandra was seeing someone. The late nights, the sudden interest in her appearance, the cold distance that had grown between them over the past year. But this, "Where's my wife? That's the other thing I need to tell you." Dr. Reyes' voice hardened further. "She's here, but she's not with Emma. She's with Monroe's lawyers. They're already spinning it as an accident, claiming he had a medical episode. Your wife, she's backing his story." Warren's vision blurred with rage. His daughter, his beautiful, innocent 9-year-old Emma with her gap-toothed smile and pigtails, was lying in a hospital bed while his wife helped the man who'd tried to kill her. "His lawyers are working overtime," Dr. Reyes continued. "With his connections and money, he'll probably get a slap on the wrist. I shouldn't be telling you this, but justice isn't coming from courtroom. They have no idea who you really are, do they?" No, they didn't. Alexandra knew he'd been in the Army, but she'd never asked for details. She didn't know about the black operations, the specialized training, the skills that could make a man disappear without a trace. She saw only a truck driver she'd grown bored with, not the weapon the military had forged. "How's Emma?" "Broken ribs, concussion, internal bleeding that we've stopped. She'll recover, but—" The doctor's voice softened. "She keeps asking for you. She doesn't understand why her mother isn't here." Warren closed his eyes. Emma was his world, the only pure thing in his life. When he'd left the military, broken and haunted, she'd been the light that pulled him back from the darkness. Now that light was dimmed, hurt by people who should have protected her. "I'm coming home. Tell Emma Daddy's coming." After hanging up, Warren sat in the cab for a long moment, feeling something cold and familiar settling over him. It was the same feeling he'd had in Kandahar when his unit had been betrayed by someone they trusted, leading to an ambush that killed 3 good men. Back then, he'd tracked down every person involved in that betrayal. None of them lived to betray anyone else. He pulled out another phone, one of several he kept for different purposes, and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Chester Cooper." "Jess, it's Warren. I need a favor." There was a pause. Chester Cooper had served alongside Warren in the Rangers and later in operations that officially never happened. Now, he ran a security consulting firm that specialized in very discreet services. Haven't heard from you in 3 years, brother. What's the situation? Someone hurt my daughter. They think they're untouchable. I'll be in Cedar Falls by morning. What do you need? Everything. Full background on Tony Monroe and everyone in his circle. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and what he's afraid of in the dark. Consider it done. Warren, how deep are we going? Warren looked at the family photo clipped to his son visor. Him, Alexandra, and Emma at the state fair last summer. Emma had cotton candy stuck in her hair and was laughing at something Warren had said. Alexandra was already looking elsewhere. All the way down, Chess. All the way down. Warren started the engine and began the long drive home, his mind already working through possibilities. Tony Monroe had made a fatal mistake. He'd hurt Emma, and worse, he'd involved Alexandra in covering it up. In the military, Warren had learned that the most effective revenge wasn't quick. It was methodical, comprehensive, and absolute. By the time he was finished, Monroe would understand what it meant to cross a man who'd been trained to eliminate threats to national security. The desert highway stretched ahead, but Warren was no longer just a truck driver heading home. He was a predator returning to his territory, and the hunt was about to begin. Chapter 2. Homecoming. Warren arrived at Cedar Falls General Hospital at 2:47 a.m., having driven 18 hours straight with only fuel stops. His massive frame, 6'3" and 200 pounds of muscle and scars, drew stares from the night staff as he strode through the corridors in his work boots and flannel shirt. Emma was asleep when he entered her room. The sight of her small body connected to monitors and 4 lines nearly broke his carefully maintained control. Her face was bruised, a bandage covered part of her head, and her left arm was in a cast covered with colorful stickers that the nurses had obviously provided. "Daddy." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, baby girl." Warren gently took her uninjured hand. "Daddy's here now. It hurts so bad, Daddy." The man in the car. He looked right at me before he hit us. "Mrs. Peterson was driving me to ballet, and she's hurt too." Mrs. Peterson, the elderly neighbor who sometimes watched Emma. Warren made a mental note to check on her as well. "Where's Mommy?" Emma asked, and Warren's jaw tightened. "She's handling some things. But I'm not going anywhere." Emma smiled weakly and squeezed his hand. "I knew you'd come. I told the doctors you'd come." Warren stayed with Emma until she fell back asleep, then found Dr. Reyes in the hallway. The doctor was a compact man in his 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that held a mixture of professional concern and personal anger. "I'm glad you made it," Dr. Reyes said. "Emma's been asking for you constantly. Tell me about her injuries." They spoke in medical terms for several minutes. Emma would recover fully, but it would take months. Warren committed every detail to memory, along with Dr. Reyes' assessment that the impact pattern was consistent with intentional collision rather than accident. "Doctor, you mentioned witnesses?" 3 different people saw Monroe accelerate into the intersection against the red light. One of them, a construction worker named Miguel Daly, said Monroe looked directly at your daughter's car before impact. Dr. Reyes handed Warren a business card. "Miguel wanted to make sure you got his contact information. He seemed concerned about how this was being handled." Warren pocketed the card. "What about Monroe?" "Treated and released within 2 hours. Claimed chest pains, but we couldn't find anything wrong with him. His lawyers had the place swarmed before the police finished their initial report." "And my wife?" Dr. Reyes' expression darkened. She arrived with Monroe's legal team, spent maybe 5 minutes with Emma, then left to give a statement supporting Monroe's medical episode story. Warren absorbed this information with the same analytical calm he'd once used to process intelligence reports. Alexandra had made her choice. She'd chosen her lover over their daughter's life. At sunrise, Warren drove to the family home, a modest 2-story house in Cedar Falls' older section. His key still worked, but everything felt different now. The living room had been redecorated in Alexandra's preferred modern style, erasing the comfortable family atmosphere it once had. Photos of Emma still lined the mantelpiece, but the wedding pictures had been moved to less prominent positions. Alexandra emerged from the kitchen as he entered, and Warren was struck by how different she looked. Gone was the warm, loving woman he'd married 12 years ago. This version of Alexandra was harder, more polished, like she was auditioning for a different life entirely. Warren, I didn't expect you back so soon. Our daughter nearly died. She's going to be fine. The doctors said. The doctors said she was deliberately targeted by your boyfriend. Warren's voice remained level, but Alexandra stepped back involuntarily. That's not. Tony had a medical episode. He's seeing specialists. Stop. Warren's command voice, the one that had once ordered men into combat, cut through her protests. I know what happened, Alexandra. The question is why you're helping him cover it up. For a moment, her mask slipped, and he saw something that looked almost like shame. Then it was gone, replaced by defiance. You don't understand the situation, Warren. Tony has resources, connections. If this goes to trial, it could drag on for years. Emma needs her mother to care more about her life than her lover's freedom. Alexandra's face flushed. You've been gone for weeks at a time, Warren. You don't know what our life has become. What I needed. I know you decided that a man who tried to kill our daughter is more important than our daughter. Warren moved past her toward the stairs, but her next words stopped him cold. I filed for divorce, Warren. Tony and we're together now. The papers are being served today. Warren turned slowly. You filed for divorce while our daughter was in the hospital? I want full custody. Given your work schedule and background, I think any reasonable judge will. My background. Warren's voice dropped to a whisper that would have sent chills through anyone who'd served with him. The therapy, the nightmares, all those classified things you won't talk about. Tony's lawyers think. Warren was across the room in 3 steps, not touching her, but close enough that she pressed against the wall. Alexandra, you're going to listen very carefully. You can have your divorce. You can have this house, the cars, whatever else you want. But if you try to take Emma from me, or if you continue helping Monroe escape justice for what he did to her, you're going to discover exactly what my background prepared me for. Alexandra's eyes widened, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Warren saw fear there. Are we clear? She nodded mutely. Warren headed upstairs to pack a bag. He'd be staying at the hospital until Emma was released, but first he had phone calls to make. Chester would have preliminary information by now, and Miguel Daly was expecting to hear from him. As Warren gathered Emma's favorite stuffed animals to take to the hospital, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Tony Monroe. We need to talk. I think we can work something out that benefits everyone. Warren stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Monroe would learn soon enough that Warren Beard wasn't interested in working anything out. The war had begun, and Monroe had no idea what kind of enemy he'd made. Chapter 3. Gathering Intelligence. Chester Cooper looked like a middle-aged accountant. Average height, thinning brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, which made him perfect for the kind of work he really did. He'd arrived in Cedar Falls at dawn and spent the day conducting what he euphemistically called background research. By evening, he had enough information on Tony Monroe to fill a small library. Warren met him at a truck stop outside town, where Chester spread files across a booth in the back corner, away from other customers. Your boy Monroe is a piece of work, Chester began, opening the first folder. 38 years old, owns 3 businesses in town, a car dealership, a construction company, and a restaurant, all inherited from his father, who built them from nothing. Warren studied Monroe's photograph, a handsome man with perfectly styled dark hair and an expensive smile. The kind of man who'd never worked a day of real labor in his life. What about his finances? That's where it gets interesting. On paper, he's worth about $2 million. In reality, he's leveraged to the hilt. The businesses are bleeding money, and he's been using them as personal ATMs for years. He owes serious money to some very unfriendly people. Chester flipped to another section. His personal life is even messier. 3 previous relationships that ended badly. One resulted in a restraining order that mysteriously disappeared from court records. Another woman, Marissa Courtney, left town suddenly after dating him for 6 months. I tracked her down. She's in Portland now and won't talk about Monroe, but she got very quiet when I mentioned his name. He has a pattern. Definitely. And your wife isn't his first married conquest. 2 years ago, he had an affair with Elena Dennis, wife of a local contractor. When her husband found out, he confronted Monroe publicly at the country club. 3 days later, Dennis's construction company lost all its municipal contracts. A week after that, his truck mysteriously caught fire. Dennis eventually sold out and left town. Warren memorized every detail. Monroe used his connections and resources to eliminate threats, but he'd never faced someone with Warren's particular skill set. What about the legal situation? Chester's expression darkened. Monroe's got the best lawyers money can buy, and they're painting this as a tragic accident caused by a medical emergency. His family doctor, Ernest Walton, has already filed a report claiming Monroe suffers from a rare heart condition that can cause sudden unconsciousness, conveniently discovered after the crash. Exactly. But here's the thing. Dr. Walton owes Monroe money. His son ran up gambling debts 2 years ago, and Monroe paid them off in exchange for future considerations. This heart condition story is Monroe calling in that favor. Warren closed the file and leaned back. What about physical security? Monroe lives in a gated community called Oakwood Estates. Big house, electronic security system, and he's hired private security since the accident. 2 guards during the day, 1 at night. All from Dominic Coyle's security firm. I know Coyle. We served together briefly. He runs a legitimate operation. His men don't know what Monroe really is. To them, he's just a businessman who needs protection after a car accident. There won't be a problem if we're careful. Warren nodded. Professional security would follow rules of engagement and protocols. They could be worked around. Chester pulled out another folder. I also ran background on your wife. You might want to see this. Warren's jaw tightened, but he opened the file. Alexandra's financial records showed a pattern of expensive purchases over the past year. Jewelry, clothes, spa treatments. Far beyond what Warren's income could support. Monroe's been funding her lifestyle for months, Chester explained. Credit cards, shopping trips, a lease on a BMW that's not in your name. He's been grooming her, Warren, making her dependent on him. The information stung, but Warren had suspected as much. Alexandra had always wanted more than his military pension and trucking income could provide. Monroe had offered her a taste of the life she thought she deserved. One more thing, Chester said, producing a final document. Miguel Daly, the witness who saw the crash, he's not just a construction worker. He's a former MP who served 2 tours in Iraq. He knows what he saw, and he's not buying the medical episode story. Warren took the address Chester provided. Miguel Daly might be the key to building a case that Monroe's lawyers couldn't dismiss. What's the plan? Chester asked. Warren was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd learned. Monroe thought he could buy his way out of attempted murder, using money and connections to escape justice. He'd underestimated 2 crucial factors: Warren's capabilities and his absolute refusal to forgive anyone who hurt his daughter. Phase 1 is information warfare. Monroe's built his life on image and reputation. We're going to systematically destroy both. Phase 2 is economic. Cut off his financial resources and isolate him from his support network. Phase 3. Warren didn't finish the sentence, but Chester understood. They'd both been part of operations where problems were solved permanently. How long do we have? Monroe's arraignment is next week. His lawyers are confident they can get the charges reduced to reckless driving with a suspended sentence. We need to move before then. Chester began packing up the files. I'll start making calls. We'll need surveillance equipment, some specialized electronics, and a few people who can ask questions without drawing attention. As they prepared to leave, Warren's phone rang. The hospital, Emma was asking for him. Go, Chester said. I'll handle the setup. But Warren, once we start this, there's no going back. Monroe won't just disappear quietly. Warren stood and shouldered his jacket. I'm counting on it. Men like Monroe think money and connections make them untouchable. They've never faced someone who learned how to hunt human beings as a profession. The drive back to the hospital took 20 minutes, but Warren's mind was already working through contingencies. Monroe had made the mistake of involving innocent people, Emma, Mrs. Peterson, and now Alexandra, in his games. Warren had learned long ago that the most effective way to defeat an enemy wasn't to attack them directly, but to dismantle their entire world piece by piece until they had nothing left to fight with. By the time Monroe realized what was happening, it would be far too late. Emma was awake when Warren arrived, and her smile reminded him why he was doing this. She was the only thing that mattered. Everything else, his marriage, his old life, his carefully maintained control, could be sacrificed if it meant protecting her. "Daddy, will you tell me a story?" Warren settled into the chair beside her bed and began telling her about a brave princess who faced down a dragon. He didn't mention that in his version, the princess had help from a warrior who made sure dragons never threatened anyone ever again. Chapter 4. The First Strike. 1 week after the accident, Warren put his plan into motion. While Emma continued recovering in hospital, drawing strength from his daily visits, and gradually regaining her spark, Warren and Chester began systematically dismantling Tony Monroe's carefully constructed life. The first target was Monroe's reputation. In a small town like Cedar Falls, image was everything, and Monroe had spent years building his persona as a successful businessman and pillar of the community. Chester had discovered that Monroe served on the hospital board, the country club committee, and was a major donor to local charities, all positions that depended on public trust. Miguel Daly proved to be exactly the ally Warren needed. The former MP met Warren at a diner on the outskirts of town, and Warren immediately recognized a kindred spirit, a man who'd seen combat and understood that some fights couldn't be won with words. "I've been waiting for someone to take this seriously," Miguel said, sliding a folder across the table. The police report was sanitized before it even hit the desk sergeant. 3 witnesses, all saying the same thing, and somehow it becomes a medical emergency. "What did you see?" Monroe accelerated toward that intersection. "I was on the crew repairing the traffic light housing, so I had a perfect view. He looked directly at your daughter's car, gunned the engine, and T-boned them deliberately." Miguel's weathered face hardened. "I've seen combat, Mr. Beard. I know the difference between an accident and an attack. Will you testify to that?" "Already tried." Monroe's lawyers got the DA to classify my statement as unreliable witness testimony because I was allegedly distracted by my work. Funny how they found out about my PTSD disability claim from 3 years ago. Warren absorbed this. Monroe's reach extended into the legal system, but that just meant Warren needed to work outside it. "Miguel, how would you feel about helping me gather some additional evidence?" The ex-MP studied Warren carefully. "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that proves Monroe isn't the man he pretends to be." 2 days later, Warren's campaign began. The first phase was subtle. Anonymous tips to local media about Monroe's business practices. Chester had discovered that Monroe's construction company had cut corners on several municipal projects, using substandard materials while billing for premium supplies. The safety violations alone were enough to trigger investigations. The Cedar Falls Gazette received a package containing construction photos, invoices, and material specifications that clearly showed the discrepancies. Within hours, reporter Suzanne Fry was making phone calls to city inspectors. Simultaneously, Warren targeted Monroe's social standing. The country club where Monroe held membership had strict moral character requirements. An anonymous letter to the board, accompanied by photos of Monroe's car after the accident and copies of witness statements, raised questions about whether a man facing vehicular assault charges should represent the club in the community. The psychological pressure began immediately. Monroe's phone started ringing with uncomfortable questions from business partners, city officials, and social contacts. Warren watched from across the street as Monroe left his office building, no longer walking with his usual confident swagger. But Monroe wasn't passive. On Thursday evening, Warren was leaving the hospital when 2 men approached him in the parking lot. Professional muscle, probably from out of town, Monroe was smart enough not to use local talent. "Mr. Beard, Mr. Monroe would like to have a conversation with you." Warren assessed the situation quickly. Both men were armed, positioning themselves to control his movement. In the old days, this would have been a simple tactical problem with a permanent solution. But Emma was upstairs, and Warren couldn't risk anything that might compromise his access to her. "Tell Monroe that if he wants to talk, he can call me like a civilized person. I don't think you understand. Warren moved faster than either man expected, his military training taking over. Within seconds, one man was on the ground with a dislocated shoulder, and the other was pressed against a car with Warren's forearm across his throat. "No, you don't understand," Warren said quietly. "This is a hospital. There are children here, including my daughter. If I see either of you near this place again, I'll demonstrate some of the other skills the Army taught me." He released the man and walked calmly back toward the hospital entrance, knowing they wouldn't pursue him into the building. But the message was clear. Monroe felt threatened enough to escalate to intimidation. That night, Warren called Chester with new instructions. "Move to Phase 2. I want Monroe's financial world to collapse." Chester had been preparing for this. Over the weekend, several things happened simultaneously. Monroe's bank received an anonymous tip about potential money laundering at his businesses, triggering an immediate audit of his accounts. His construction company's bonding agency was informed about the safety violations, leading to suspension of his ability to bid on new projects. And his largest creditor received information suggesting that Monroe had been hiding assets in his divorce from his first wife. By Monday morning, Monroe's credit lines were frozen, his business operations were suspended, and his assets were under investigation. The careful financial house of cards that had supported his lifestyle for years began to crumble. Warren observed the results from his usual position across from Monroe's office building. Monroe arrived late, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled. Throughout the day, Warren watched as angry creditors and investigators streamed in and out of the building. At 3 p.m., Monroe emerged and stood on the sidewalk, looking directly at Warren's position. Even from a distance, Warren could see the rage and desperation in the man's posture. Monroe pulled out his phone and made a call. Warren's phone rang moments later. "You son of a bitch." Monroe's voice was tight, with barely controlled fury. "You think you're clever, don't you? I think you tried to kill my daughter and used my wife to cover it up. This isn't over, Beard. You have no idea who you're fucking with. Actually, I do. You're a spoiled rich boy who's never faced real consequences for anything. But that's about to change." Warren hung up and walked back to his truck. Phase 2 was proceeding perfectly. Monroe was angry, desperate, and making mistakes. Soon he would do something stupid, and when he did, Warren would be ready. That evening, as Warren sat with Emma helping her with a puzzle, she looked up at him with serious eyes. "Daddy, are you mad at Mommy?" Warren chose his words carefully. "Mommy made some choices that hurt our family, sweetheart. But none of that is your fault, and no matter what happens, you're the most important thing in the world to me." Emma nodded solemnly. "I heard the nurses talking. They said the man who hit us might not get in trouble. Don't worry about that, baby girl. Sometimes adults have to handle complicated problems in their own way." Emma squeezed his hand. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Emma. More than you'll ever know." As Warren tucked Emma in for the night, he thought about Monroe's threat. The man still believed this was a game he could win through intimidation and money. Tomorrow, Warren would begin teaching him exactly how wrong he was. Chapter 5. Psychological Warfare. By the second week of Warren's campaign, Tony Monroe was beginning to crack. His business empire was under investigation, his social standing was crumbling, and his financial resources were increasingly restricted. But Warren was just getting started. Chester had recruited additional help, a team of specialists who owed Warren favors from their military days. They began around-the-clock surveillance of Monroe, documenting his every move, his associates, and his weaknesses. What they discovered painted a picture of a man spiraling into paranoia and desperation. "He's drinking heavily," Chester reported during their morning briefing at the truck stop. "Started hiring more security, but he's running out of money to pay them. And he's making mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" "Last night, he drove to a meeting with Russ Branch. Remember him? The loan shark who finances some of Monroe's operations. Our surveillance caught the entire conversation. Monroe's begging for extensions on debts, and Branch isn't interested in excuses." Warren studied the surveillance photos. Monroe looked haggard, his expensive clothes wrinkled, his confident demeanor replaced by the hunted look of a cornered animal. "There's more," Chester continued. "Monroe tried to visit your wife yesterday, but she wouldn't see him. Apparently, the divorce proceedings aren't going as smoothly as she expected. Monroe's assets being frozen means he can't provide the lifestyle he promised her. Warren felt a grim satisfaction. Alexandra was learning that her new life came with its own complications. What about the legal situation? His arraignment is tomorrow. The DA is still treating it as vehicular manslaughter with the possibility of pleading down to reckless driving. But our media campaign is working. There's public pressure to take this seriously now. Warren had orchestrated a careful information campaign through Miguel Daly and other contacts. Letters to the editor questioning why a wealthy businessman received preferential treatment, social media posts highlighting the victim impact, and quiet conversations with community leaders had shifted public opinion. Monroe was no longer just another citizen with a good lawyer. He was a symbol of inequality in the justice system. Time for Phase 3, Warren decided. I want Monroe to understand that this isn't just about money or reputation. This is personal. That evening, Warren visited Monroe's house in Oakwood Estates. The security guards at the gate recognized him from the photos Monroe had undoubtedly provided, but Warren wasn't trying to hide. He wanted Monroe to know he was there. "I'm here to see Tony Monroe," Warren told the guard. "Tell him Warren Beard would like to have that conversation he's been requesting." 20 minutes later, Monroe appeared at the gate, flanked by 2 private security guards. Up close, Warren could see the toll the past weeks had taken. Monroe's hands shook slightly, and his eyes had the hyper-vigilant look of a man who wasn't sleeping well. "You've got some balls coming here," Monroe said, trying to project his old confidence. "You want to talk? Let's talk." Monroe dismissed his guards with a gesture, stepping closer to the gate, but keeping the barrier between them. "What do you want, Beard? I want you to understand something. You didn't just hit a car. You didn't just injure my daughter. You looked her in the eye and tried to murder a 9-year-old child because you wanted to hurt me. That's bullshit. It was an accident. Miguel Daly saw you accelerate. 3 other witnesses confirm you ran a red light deliberately. But none of that matters anymore, because we're past the point where courts and lawyers can fix this." Monroe's facade cracked slightly. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means you made this personal when you involved Emma. Now you're going to learn what happens when you threaten something I love." Warren turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Monroe, you might want to check your security system. I've been watching you for weeks, and your guards are good, but they're not that good." As Warren walked back to his truck, he saw Monroe frantically checking his phone, probably trying to contact a security company. By morning, Monroe would discover that several security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned, that his alarm system had a gap in its coverage, and that someone had been close enough to his house to leave a simple message. "Emma Beard remembers." The psychological pressure was having its intended effect. Monroe was making increasingly desperate moves, and his behavior was alienating the few allies he had left. Suzanne Fry from the Gazette had been investigating his background and uncovered the pattern of women who'd left town after dating him. The hospital board was reconsidering his membership after patient families questioned why a man facing criminal charges was making decisions about their care. But Monroe's most dangerous mistake was yet to come. The next morning, Warren was having breakfast with Emma in her hospital room when his phone rang. Dr. Reyes sounded shaken. "Mr. Beard, I need to inform you that someone attempted to access Emma's medical records last night. Our IT department traced the breach attempt to an IP address registered to Monroe's business." Warren felt ice-cold rage wash over him. What kind of information was he after? "Patient records, insurance information, discharge plans. We stopped the breach, but..." Dr. Reyes paused. "There's something else." Monroe made inquiries about Emma's treatment schedule, when she'd be moved to different departments, things like that. The implication was clear. Monroe was either planning to use Emma's medical information against Warren somehow, or worse, he might be planning another attempt to hurt her. "Doctor, I need enhanced security for Emma's room immediately." "Already done. Hospital security is posted outside, and I've instructed the staff that only immediate family members are allowed access." After hanging up, Warren looked at Emma, who was coloring in a book, oblivious to the danger swirling around her. She looked so small on the hospital bed, still bearing the physical reminders of Monroe's attack. The sight hardened Warren's resolve. Monroe had just crossed the line from which there was no return. Warren called Chester with new instructions. All restraints are off. Monroe just went after Emma again. I want him completely isolated and destroyed before he can hurt anyone else. What are you thinking? He's desperate now, which makes him unpredictable. Desperate men do stupid things, and stupid things create opportunities. That afternoon, Warren implemented the most ruthless phase of his plan. Using contact from his military days, he arranged for Monroe to receive some very disturbing information. Doctor documents suggesting that Warren Beard wasn't just a truck driver and veteran, but a former black operations specialist with a body count in double digits. The psychological profile painted Warren as a man who'd eliminated targets across 3 continents, someone trained in advanced interrogation techniques and skilled in making problems disappear permanently. Most of it was fiction, but it was believable fiction crafted by people who understood psychological warfare. Monroe received this information through back channels. Contacts who owed Warren favors, private investigators who could be trusted to deliver a message without revealing its source. By evening, Monroe would believe he was facing an enemy far more dangerous than he'd imagined. Warren's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I know what you really are. Stay away from me and mine, or I go to the police with everything. Warren smiled grimly. Monroe had taken the bait perfectly. Now came the final phase, forcing Monroe into a position where he would destroy himself through his own actions. The trap was set. All Warren had to do was wait for Monroe to walk into it. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. Monroe's desperation reached a breaking point 3 days after receiving the fabricated intelligence about Warren's background. Instead of backing down, he chose escalation, exactly what Warren had been counting on. The first sign came when Chester called Warren at 6 a.m. with urgent news. Monroe's hired killers, Chester said without preamble. 2 professionals from Chicago arrived yesterday evening. They're not muscle like the guys who approach you at the hospital. These are the real deal. Warren felt a familiar coldness settle over him. Where are they now? Surveillance picked them up checking into the Marriott under false names. They've been asking questions about your routine, Emma's hospital schedule, even your truck's usual parking spots. Warren looked at Emma, still sleeping peacefully in her hospital bed. Monroe had escalated from attempted murder to conspiracy to commit murder. There could be no half measures now. Pull our surveillance teams back. I don't want anyone caught in the crossfire. Warren, these aren't street thugs. If Monroe's hired professionals, then it's time for him to learn what a real professional looks like. Warren had been preparing for this possibility since the campaign began. His truck was equipped with military-grade communication equipment, body armor, and other tools that weren't standard for civilian vehicles. More importantly, he'd spent weeks studying every aspect of Monroe's routine, his security arrangements, and his escape routes. At 10 a.m., Warren kissed Emma goodbye and told her he had some business to handle. She hugged him tightly, and for a moment, Warren wondered if she sensed the danger surrounding them. Be careful, Daddy. Always am, sweetheart. Warren's first stop was the Cedar Falls Police Department, where he met with Detective Guillermo Hansen, the officer nominally in charge of Emma's case. Hansen was a good cop trapped in a bad situation. Monroe's political connections had limited his investigation, but he still cared about justice. Detective, I have reason to believe Tony Monroe has hired outside contractors to intimidate witnesses in Emma's case. Warren provided carefully edited surveillance footage showing the 2 Chicago professionals conducting reconnaissance on the hospital and photographing Warren's truck. The footage didn't reveal Warren's own surveillance operation, but it clearly showed suspicious activity by out-of-state individuals connected to Monroe. This changes everything, Hansen said, studying the evidence. If Monroe's importing talent to intimidate witnesses, it demonstrates consciousness of guilt and obstruction of justice. More importantly, it shows he's dangerous to other potential victims. Hansen immediately initiated surveillance on Monroe and began the process of obtaining warrants. Warren had just provided law enforcement with the justification they needed to take Monroe seriously as a threat. But Warren wasn't finished. Phase 2 of his trap involved forcing Monroe into a public confrontation that would destroy any remaining sympathy for him in the community. Warren parked his truck outside Monroe's dealership and waited. Security cameras would record everything that happened next, providing irrefutable documentation of Monroe's state of mind and behavior. Monroe emerged within minutes, flanked by the 2 Chicago professionals and his regular security detail. He approached Warren's truck with the swagger of a man who believed he held all the cards. "Beard, get out of the truck. We're ending this today." Warren stepped out slowly, hands visible, making sure the security cameras captured Monroe's aggressive posture and threatening language. "You want to talk, Monroe? Let's talk. You think you're clever, spreading lies about me, destroying my business?" Monroe's voice was rising, drawing attention from passers-by. "You think you can intimidate me? I think you tried to murder my daughter and hired killers to silence witnesses. That's not intimidation. That's fact. You're fucking delusional." Monroe was shouting now, his composure completely gone. "I had a medical emergency. It was an accident. Miguel daily saw you accelerate. 3 witnesses saw you target Emma's car. And now you've brought muscle from Chicago to threaten anyone who might testify against you." Monroe's face went white. He hadn't expected Warren to know about the hired professionals, and his reaction was being recorded by multiple security cameras. "I don't know what you're talking about. Their names are Wesley Reyes and Bill Moses," Warren said, using names he'd obtained through contacts. "They checked into the Marriott 2 days ago, and they've been conducting surveillance on my daughter's hospital room." Monroe glanced instinctively at the 2 men flanking him, and that glance was caught on camera. In that moment, he confirmed Warren's accusations without saying a word. "You're insane," Monroe said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe, but I'm also right." Warren stepped closer, lowering his voice so the cameras couldn't pick up his words. "You made one mistake, Monroe. You involved Emma. Everything else I might have forgiven eventually, but you looked my 9-year-old daughter in the eye and tried to kill her. That's something I can never let go." Monroe opened his mouth to respond, but Warren was already walking back to his truck. The confrontation had been recorded from 3 different angles, showing Monroe's increasingly unhinged behavior and his obvious connection to suspicious out-of-state operatives. Within an hour, edited footage of the confrontation was anonymously provided to the Cedar Falls Gazette, the local TV station, and several social media influencers. By evening, the video would be viral throughout the county, showing Tony Monroe as an unstable man making threats while surrounded by hired muscle. But the real trap was still coming. That night, Warren received the call he'd been expecting. "Beard, this is your last warning. Back off, or you and your daughter are going to have another accident. Monroe, you just threatened a child on a recorded line. Hope your lawyers are better than you think they are." Warren hung up and immediately forwarded the recorded threat to Detective Hansen, who already had warrants prepared. The combination of witness intimidation, importing criminals across state lines, and direct threats against a minor gave law enforcement everything they needed to act decisively. At 3 a.m., simultaneous raids hit Monroe's house, his business, and the hotel where the Chicago professionals were staying. Monroe was arrested on multiple charges: conspiracy to commit witness intimidation, making terroristic threats, and obstruction of justice. The hired killers were taken into custody on weapons charges and held without bail pending investigation of their backgrounds. Warren watched the news coverage from Emma's hospital room, where she was finally scheduled to be discharged later that day. "The man who hurt me is in jail," Emma asked, not fully understanding the situation, but sensing that something had changed. "Yes, sweetheart. He can't hurt anyone anymore." But Warren knew the real resolution was still coming. Monroe's arrest was just the beginning. The legal system would handle the criminal charges, but Warren had a deeper kind of justice in mind, one that would ensure Monroe never threatened another innocent person. As Warren helped Emma pack her things for the trip home, he reflected on how perfectly Monroe had destroyed himself. Every move the man had made, hiring killers, making threats, escalating the confrontation, had been exactly what Warren had maneuvered him into doing. Monroe had believed he was fighting a truck driver with military training. He'd never realized he was facing someone who understood that the most effective way to destroy an enemy was to let them destroy themselves. The trap had worked perfectly. Now came the final act. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. Emma's homecoming should have been a celebration, but Warren knew it was merely the calm before the final storm. While Monroe sat in county jail awaiting trial on multiple felony charges, Warren had discovered something that changed everything. Monroe's legal team was preparing an insanity defense based on the very psychological profile Warren had used to manipulate him. Dr. Ernest Walton, Monroe's family physician, was prepared to testify that Monroe suffered from paranoid delusions triggered by harassment from a dangerous military operative. The defense strategy was brilliant. Use Warren's own psychological warfare against him by claiming it had driven Monroe to temporary insanity. They're going to paint you as the aggressor, Chester explained during their meeting at the truck stop. Monroe's lawyers found evidence of our surveillance, the financial pressure campaign, everything. They're arguing that you systematically tortured their client into a breakdown. Warren studied the legal brief Chester had obtained through contacts in the courthouse. What about the hired killers? They're claiming Monroe hired bodyguards because he feared for his life. His lawyers are spinning it as legitimate self-defense measures by a businessman being stalked by a trained killer. The irony wasn't lost on Warren. Monroe's legal team was using Warren's own tactics, manipulation of perception and psychological pressure, to construct a defense that might actually work. If successful, Monroe would receive treatment instead of prison time, and Warren could face criminal charges for harassment and intimidation. There's more, Chester continued. Your wife has agreed to testify for Monroe's defense. She's going to claim you exhibited dangerous and unstable behavior throughout your marriage, that she feared for her safety and Emma's. Warren absorbed this betrayal with the same cold calculation he'd brought to the entire campaign. Alexandra had chosen her side completely now, willing to sacrifice her own daughter's justice to save her lover. What's her angle? Full custody of Emma in exchange for her testimony. Monroe's lawyers are arguing that Emma isn't safe with you, given your alleged instability and history of violence. Warren looked out the window at the parking lot, watching normal people go about their lives, unaware that their world contained predators like Monroe and enablers like Alexandra. Everything he'd built, his relationship with Emma, his carefully controlled civilian life, his hope for some kind of normal future, was being systematically destroyed by people who saw his daughter as nothing more than a pawn in their game. How long do we have? The preliminary hearing is next week. If Monroe's team successfully establishes their narrative, you could be arrested as early as next month. Warren made his decision. The legal system had been compromised from the beginning. Monroe's money and connections had corrupted it beyond repair. But Warren had always known this might happen, and he'd prepared for it. Chester, I need you to do something for me. Take Emma somewhere safe, somewhere Monroe's people can't find her. Warren, what are you planning? What I should have done from the beginning. That evening, Warren tucked Emma into bed in the small apartment he'd rented near the hospital. She'd been asking questions about why they couldn't go back to their old house, why Mommy wasn't visiting, why the nice police officers kept checking on them. Daddy, are we in trouble? Warren sat on the edge of her bed, stroking her hair. She looked so much like he remembered her mother from years ago, before Alexandra had become someone else entirely. Some people are trying to make trouble for us, sweetheart, but I'm going to make sure you're safe, no matter what happens. Will I see you tomorrow? Warren's throat tightened. I'm going to make sure you're taken care of, Emma. Uncle Chester is going to take you on a special trip while Daddy handles some grown-up problems. Emma studied his face with the intuitive wisdom children sometimes possess. Are you going away? For a little while. But I need you to remember something, okay? No matter what anyone tells you about me, no matter what you hear on TV or what other people say, I love you more than anything in the world. Everything I do is to protect you. Emma hugged him tightly. I love you too, Daddy. You're the best daddy ever. Warren held his daughter for a long moment, memorizing the feeling of her small arms around his neck, her complete trust in his ability to keep her safe. When this was over, she might hate him for what he was about to do, but she would be alive to hate him, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, Warren met Chester at dawn to transfer Emma to a safe house run by people who owed Warren favors from the old days. She would be protected and cared for while Warren handled the final phase of his war against Monroe. "You don't have to do this," Chester said as they watched Emma's car disappear down the highway. "We could run. New identities, different country. You've got contacts who could make it happen. And let Monroe walk free? Let him hurt other children? Let Alexandra destroy Emma's faith in justice." Warren shook his head. "Some battles you fight because you have to. This is one of them." Warren spent the rest of the day making final preparations. He liquidated his assets, arranged for Emma's financial security regardless of what happened to him, and wrote a detailed letter explaining his actions for her to read when she was old enough to understand. That night, Warren broke into Monroe's house. The security system Chester had compromised weeks earlier still had vulnerabilities that Warren exploited. Monroe was being held without bail, but Warren needed access to the man's private spaces, his computer, his personal files, the evidence of what he'd really done to Emma and others. What Warren found in Monroe's private office was worse than he'd imagined. Photos of Emma taken weeks before the accident, detailed notes about her school schedule and daily routine, and records of payments to people who'd provided information about Warren's family. The attack on Emma hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment act of rage. It had been planned, calculated, designed to hurt Warren in the most devastating way possible. Monroe had studied his target, identified his weakness, and struck with precision. But the most damning evidence was a video file on Monroe's private computer, security footage from his car showing the moments before the collision. In the video, Monroe was clearly conscious and alert, deliberately steering toward Emma's car while she looked directly at him through the window. Warren copied everything to multiple drives, then called Detective Hansen. "Detective, I've just discovered evidence that Monroe's attack on Emma was premeditated. I'm sending you the location and access codes. You'll want to see this before his lawyers have a chance to destroy it." "Beard, how did you?" "Does it matter? This evidence proves Monroe is a predator who targeted my daughter specifically. Everything else is just noise." Warren hung up and drove to the county jail, where Monroe was being held pending trial. Getting inside required calling in favors from his military days, contacts who could arrange a brief meeting with a prisoner without official documentation. Monroe looked haggard and desperate when he was brought to the small interview room. 3 weeks in jail had stripped away his polished facade, revealing the weak, entitled creature underneath. "You son of a bitch," Monroe said, launching into the same impotent rage Warren had seen before. "You destroyed my life. You turned everyone against me. I found a video, Monroe." Monroe's mouth snapped shut, his face going white. "The security footage from your car. The photos of Emma in your office. The payment records to your informants." Warren leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You didn't try to kill my daughter in a moment of anger. You planned it. You studied her, watched her, chose the perfect moment to destroy her life." Monroe's hands were shaking now. I never. You're not going to hide behind lawyers or doctors or fake medical conditions. Everyone is going to know exactly what you are." Warren stood to leave, but Monroe grabbed his arm desperately. "Wait, we can make a deal. I have money, offshore accounts your investigation missed. I'll give you everything if you just..." Warren looked down at Monroe's hand, clutching his sleeve, then back at the broken man's face. "There is no deal, Monroe. There is no escape. You hurt my daughter, and now you're going to pay for it. Not in some comfortable psychiatric facility, not with a reduced sentence, not with money or connections or legal tricks. You're going to pay completely." Warren walked out of the jail and drove to the one place he knew he'd find Alexandra, the expensive hotel where she'd been staying since filing for divorce. She answered her door wearing silk pajamas and holding a glass of wine, looking more relaxed than she had any right to be given that her daughter was recovering from attempted murder. "Warren, I wondered when you'd come. I wanted to give you one chance to do the right thing." Alexandra stepped aside to let him enter the suite. Paid for, Warren noted, with Monroe's money even while he sat in jail. "What's the right thing, Warren?" "Letting you drag Emma into your war with Tony. The right thing is admitting that your boyfriend tried to murder our daughter. It was an accident. I found a video, Alexandra. the security footage from his car. He planned it, studied Emma's routine, chose the perfect moment to attack her. And you're helping him escape justice for it. For the first time since Warren had arrived, Alexandra's composure cracked. She set down her wine glass with trembling hands. That's not. Tony wouldn't. You know what he is. You've always known. But you chose him anyway because he offered you the life you thought you deserved. Alexandra sank into a chair, her face crumbling. I never wanted Emma to get hurt. I never thought. You never thought. You never considered anyone but yourself. Emma almost died, Alexandra. Your daughter almost died, and you help her attack her or cover it up. Tears were streaming down Alexandra's face now, but Warren felt no sympathy. She'd made her choices, and Emma had paid the price. I can't change what happened, Alexandra whispered. But I can't lose Emma too. She's all I have left. You lost Emma the moment you chose Monroe over her. The custody hearing is next week. You're going to withdraw your petition and sign over full custody to me. I can't do that. Yes, you can. Because if you don't, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what you are. Every friend, every family member, every person you've ever met will know that you sacrificed your daughter's life for a man who tried to murder her. Warren pulled out his phone and showed Alexandra a video file. Footage of her meeting with Monroe's lawyers, laughing and holding hands with Monroe's associate while Emma lay in the hospital. This was taken 2 days after the accident. While Emma was fighting for her life, you were celebrating with the people trying to get her attacker acquitted. Alexandra stared at the footage, her face pale with horror. 24 hours, Alexandra. Withdraw the custody petition and disappear from Emma's life, or I destroy you as completely as you destroyed our family. Warren left the hotel knowing that Alexandra would comply. She'd chosen self-preservation over everything else throughout this ordeal. She wouldn't change now. As Warren drove through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, he reflected on how completely Monroe's world had collapsed. The man had lost his business, his freedom, his reputation, and now his legal defense. The video evidence would ensure a murder conviction, and Alexandra's withdrawal from the custody battle would give Emma the stable home she deserved. Justice had been served, but Warren felt no satisfaction. Emma was safe, and that was all that mattered. Everything else was just the price that had to be paid to protect the only thing in his life worth protecting. The war was over. Warren had won, but victory looked different than he'd expected. Quieter, lonelier, and stained with the knowledge that some battles could only be won by becoming something you'd never wanted to be. Tomorrow, he would begin the long process of rebuilding a life worthy of his daughter's love. Chapter 8. Final Justice. The trial of Tony Monroe began on a cold November morning, 6 months after the attack that had changed everything. Warren sat in the gallery's front row, watching as Monroe, now gaunt and hollow-eyed from his time in county jail, was led to the defendant's table in shackles. Emma wasn't present. Warren had made sure she was away at a specialized camp for children recovering from trauma, surrounded by counselors and other kids who understood what it meant to survive someone else's violence. She was healing, laughing again, and slowly learning to trust the world. That was all Warren cared about now. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Lena Holder, methodically presented the evidence Warren had uncovered. The security footage from Monroe's car showed him deliberately targeting Emma's vehicle. The photographs and surveillance records from his home office proved premeditation. The testimony of witnesses like Miguel Daly established the pattern of deliberate action rather than accident. Monroe's defense team, led by celebrity lawyer Felicia York, tried desperately to salvage their insanity plea. They brought in Dr. Ernest Walton to testify about Monroe's alleged medical condition, but the prosecution had their own medical experts who demolished the fabricated diagnosis. Dr. Walton, D.A. Holder said during cross-examination, "Isn't it true that you owe Mr. Monroe a substantial sum of money? That's not relevant to. Isn't it true that Mr. Monroe paid off your son's gambling debts in exchange for what he called future considerations?" Warren watched Dr. Walton's credibility evaporate as he stumbled through his answers. Without the fake medical condition, Monroe's defense collapsed entirely. Alexandra testified for the prosecution, not the defense. Her attorney had advised her that cooperating fully was her only chance to avoid charges as an accessory after the fact. She looked older, smaller somehow, as she admitted on the stand that Monroe had confessed to her that the attack was intentional. He said Emma was a message. Alexandra testified, her voice barely audible. He wanted Warren to know what happened to people who crossed him. Monroe's face twisted with rage as his former lover destroyed his last hope of avoiding conviction. He lunged toward her, screaming obscenities before bailiffs restrained him. The jury saw exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Warren felt a weight lift from his shoulders as the verdict was read. Attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit witness intimidation, making terroristic threats. Monroe would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. But Warren wasn't finished. That night, he made a phone call to contacts from his military days, people who specialized in problems that couldn't be solved through official channels. The conversation was brief and coded, but the message was clear: Tony Monroe would not survive his incarceration. "Are you sure about this?" the voice on the other end asked. "Once this happens, there's no taking it back. He tried to murder a 9-year-old child. He planned it, executed it, and tried to cover it up. Some crimes don't deserve the possibility of redemption." Within a week of Monroe's transfer to state prison, he was found dead in his cell. The official cause was suicide. Monroe had allegedly hanged himself using bedsheets, unable to cope with his life sentence and the constant threats from other inmates who didn't appreciate child killers. Warren read the news report while having breakfast with Emma at their new home in Colorado, where they'd moved to start fresh. She was enrolled in a good school, making friends, and slowly leaving the trauma behind her. "Daddy, who was that man in the newspaper?" Warren folded the paper carefully. "Someone who hurt people. He can't hurt anyone anymore." Emma nodded and returned to her cereal, accepting the explanation with the resilience children possess. She was safe now, and that was all that mattered. 3 months later, Warren received divorce papers from Alexandra. She was living in California now, working as a receptionist and trying to rebuild her life away from the wreckage of her choices. The papers included a complete custody surrender. Alexandra legally relinquished all rights to Emma in exchange for Warren not pursuing civil or criminal charges against her. Warren signed the papers without hesitation. Emma deserved a parent who would put her first, always and without question. Alexandra had proven she wasn't capable of that. The financial settlement was simple. Alexandra could keep whatever money she had left from Monroe's assets before they were seized. Warren kept everything else, including the life insurance policy that would ensure Emma's future education and security. Dr. Wesley Reyes, the physician who had first alerted Warren to the conspiracy, became a regular part of their lives. He visited Emma monthly to monitor her recovery and had become something like a grandfather figure to her. He'd never spoken publicly about his role in exposing Monroe's crimes, but Warren made sure he knew his courage was appreciated. "Emma's doing remarkably well," Dr. Reyes reported during one of his visits. "The nightmares have stopped, and she's showing no signs of lasting psychological trauma. Children are more resilient than we often give them credit for." Warren watched Emma playing in their backyard, chasing their new dog, a golden retriever she'd named Courage, around the swing set he'd installed. She was laughing, completely absorbed in the simple joy of being a child. "She's strong," Warren agreed. "Stronger than either of her parents." Miguel Daly had also become part of their extended family. The former MP had moved to Colorado as well, hired by Warren's new trucking company as a safety inspector. He understood what it meant to protect innocent people from predators, and Warren trusted him completely. "Any regrets?" Miguel asked one evening as they watched Emma practice piano in their living room. Warren considered the question. Monroe was dead. Alexandra was gone. Emma was safe and happy. The life he'd built in Cedar Falls was destroyed, but something better had taken its place. "No," Warren said finally. "None at all. Chester Cooper visited occasionally, bringing news from the outside world and updates on other operations. He'd been impressed by the thoroughness of Warren's campaign against Monroe, but he also understood the cost. You can never go back to the way things were, Chester observed during one visit. I don't want to. The man I was before Monroe hurt Emma was willing to let other people handle justice. The man I am now knows that sometimes you have to handle it yourself. Emma finished her piano practice and ran to Warren for a goodnight hug. She was growing tall and strong, her smile bright and untroubled. She called Warren Daddy and meant it completely. He was her whole world, just as she was his. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, baby girl. More than you'll ever know. As Warren tucked Emma into bed, he thought about the choices that had led them here. He destroyed lives, ended careers, and ultimately arranged for a man's death. By any moral standard, he'd become something dark and unforgivable. But Emma was alive, safe, and happy. She would grow up knowing that her father would move heaven and earth to protect her, that some people in the world could be trusted completely. She would never doubt that she was loved unconditionally. That was worth any price Warren had paid or would ever have to pay. The war was over. Emma was safe. Justice had been served completely and finally. Warren Beard slept peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that tomorrow would bring nothing but the simple joy of being Emma's father in a world where she would never again be threatened by people like Tony Monroe or Alexandra Pierce. Some stories end with redemption. Some end with forgiveness. This one ended with a father's love proving stronger than his enemy's cruelty, and that was enough. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. 2 years after Tony Monroe's death, Warren Beard stood in the audience of Emma's school auditorium, watching his daughter perform in the 6th grade production of Annie. She was singing Tomorrow with a clear, confident voice that filled the room with hope and joy. Emma was 12 now, taller and more poised, but still the same bright-eyed girl who had once asked him to tell her stories about brave princesses. She wore her hair in braids tied with red ribbons, and when she spotted Warren in the audience, her face lit up with a smile that made everything he'd done worthwhile. The past 2 years had been about healing and building something new from the ashes of their old life. Warren's trucking company, Rocky Mountain Transport, employed 17 drivers and had contracts throughout the western states. It wasn't about the money. Warren had more than enough from Monroe's seized assets and insurance settlements, but about creating something meaningful that could provide for Emma's future. Miguel Daly ran the day-to-day operations while Warren focused on being a father. He coached Emma's softball team, helped with homework, and made sure he was present for every important moment in her life. The long-distance hauling was behind him. Now he was home every night for dinner and bedtime stories. Dr. Wesley Reyes had become like family. He'd moved to Colorado to be closer to Emma and had established a pediatric practice that specialized in treating children who'd survived trauma. He checked on Emma monthly, more as a friend than a doctor, and always reported the same thing. She was thriving. Emma's resilience continues to amaze me, Dr. Reyes told Warren after the school play. She's processing her experience in a healthy way, and she's learned to trust the world again. You should be proud of what you've accomplished. Warren watched Emma signing autographs for younger children who'd been impressed by her performance. She was patient and kind with each child, remembering what it felt like to be small and scared. She did the work, Warren said. I just made sure she was safe while she did it. Chester Cooper attended the play as well, having flown in from his latest security consulting job. He'd become something of an uncle to Emma, teaching her card games and bringing presents from his travels around the world. She's got your eyes, Chester observed, but none of your paranoia. That's probably a good thing. Warren smiled. Emma trusted easily, laughed freely, and believed in people's basic goodness. She was everything Warren had once been before the military, before Alexandra's betrayal, before he'd learned that sometimes good people had to do terrible things to protect what mattered. Any word from California? Chester asked quietly. Warren knew he meant Alexandra. She'd sent birthday cards to Emma for the first year after the divorce, but Emma had shown no interest in them. Eventually, the cards stopped coming. Alexandra had remarried, a businessman named Dwight Miles who knew nothing about her past, and was apparently trying to build a new life based on lies and omissions. Emma doesn't ask about her anymore, Warren said. She's accepted that I'm her only parent now. Kids are adaptable. They want stability more than complexity. As the evening wound down, Warren helped Emma change out of her costume and gather her things. She chattered excitedly about the performance, the applause, and her plans for the cast party next weekend. "Did you see Mrs. Mueller crying during my solo?" Emma asked as they walked to Warren's truck. She said it reminded her of her daughter when she was my age. Warren had seen it. Johanna Mueller, one of Emma's teachers, had lost her own daughter in a car accident 5 years earlier. Emma's performance had touched something deep and healing in the woman's grief. "Your voice is beautiful, sweetheart. You made a lot of people happy tonight." Emma climbed into the passenger seat. She was tall enough now to sit in front and buckled her seatbelt. "Daddy, do you think Mommy would have liked the play?" It was the first time Emma had mentioned Alexandra in months. Warren chose his words carefully. "I think anyone who loves you would be proud of what you accomplished tonight." Emma nodded, satisfied with the answer. "I'm glad you were there. You're the best audience ever." As they drove home through the quiet Colorado evening, Warren reflected on how completely their lives had changed. The house in Cedar Falls was a distant memory. Alexandra was a stranger living under a different name in a different state. Tony Monroe was dead and buried, his memory erased from everything that mattered. But Emma was thriving. She had friends, activities, dreams about her future. She wanted to be a veterinarian now, inspired by their dog courage and the injured animals she sometimes helped Dr. Reyes treat at his clinic. "Daddy, can we get another dog? We already have Courage, but he gets lonely when we're at school and work. Maybe a friend for him." Warren pretended to consider this seriously. "What kind of friend? A little dog this time? Maybe a beagle? They're good with kids." Warren had already been thinking about getting Emma another pet. She was responsible with Courage, and caring for animals taught important lessons about compassion and commitment. "We'll visit the shelter this weekend and see who needs a home." Emma beamed. "Really? You're the best dad ever." Warren felt the familiar warmth that filled him every time Emma expressed her complete trust and love. He'd remade himself into the father she deserved, and she'd never known a moment's doubt about his dedication to her happiness and safety. At home, Emma went through her evening routine: homework, shower, bedtime snack, while Warren checked emails and reviewed business reports. The trucking company was doing well, and Warren was considering expanding into freight logistics and warehouse management. When Emma was ready for bed, Warren joined her for their nightly ritual of reading together. Tonight, she'd chosen a book about a girl detective solving mysteries in her small town. Emma loved stories about smart, brave protagonists who solved problems through intelligence and determination. "Daddy, do you think I could be a detective like Nancy Drew?" "You could be anything you want to be, Emma. You're smart enough, brave enough, and stubborn enough to solve any mystery." Emma giggled. "I'm not stubborn," says the girl who spent 3 hours last week trying to teach Courage to shake hands. He learned eventually. Warren kissed her forehead and turned off the light. "Sleep well, baby girl. Sweet dreams. Love you, Daddy." "Love you too, Emma. Always and forever." Warren closed her bedroom door and walked to his own room, where he kept the letter he'd written to Emma when she was 9 years old. He read it sometimes, remembering the man he'd been during those dark months when Monroe's actions had nearly destroyed everything he cared about. The letter explained his choices, his actions, and his reasons for everything he'd done to protect her. Someday, when Emma was older, he might show it to her. Or maybe he'd destroy it, letting her remember only the father who had been present for every important moment of her life. Warren opened his laptop and began writing in the journal he'd kept since moving to Colorado. Tonight's entry was simple. Emma performed in the school play tonight. She was magnificent, confident, joyful, completely present in the moment. She's 12 years old now, and I can see the woman she's becoming. Strong, compassionate, unafraid of the world. She asked about getting another dog. "We'll go to the shelter this weekend. She needs something to nurture and protect. It's in her nature to care for others. I'll make sure she never has to learn what it means to protect someone through violence." Alexandra's birthday cards stopped coming months ago. Emma doesn't mention her anymore. Some betrayals are too complete to forgive, even for a child. Emma understands, in her way, that I'm the parent who stayed, who fought for her, who chose her over everything else. Monroe has been dead for 2 years. Sometimes I wonder if Emma remembers him at all, or if he's just part of the vague before time that existed when she was smaller. That's probably for the best. She deserves to grow up without nightmares about the monsters who tried to hurt her. Tomorrow we'll visit the animal shelter. Emma will choose a dog based on which one needs her most. That's how she thinks about the world. She sees creatures that need protecting and immediately wants to help them. It's the most beautiful thing about her. I built this life on a foundation of violence and revenge, but what's growing here is pure and good. Emma will never know what I did to the people who threatened her. She'll only know that her father kept her safe and loved her completely. That's enough. That's everything. Warren closed the laptop and prepared for bed. Outside, Colorado snow was beginning to fall, covering the world in quiet whiteness. Inside, Emma slept peacefully in her room, surrounded by stuffed animals and books and all the treasures of childhood built on safety and love. Warren had won the war that mattered most. Emma was growing up strong and happy, surrounded by people who would protect her from any future threats. She would never again face the kind of evil that Tony Monroe represented, because Warren had made sure such threats couldn't survive in her world. Some fathers taught their children to fight. Warren had fought so his daughter